Genie on the Loose by Robert Leeson. Read by Kenneth Shanley. Chapter 1. Last of the Great Sleepers. Half undressed, Alec Bowden sat in his room. He yawned, a great, cracking, comfortable yawn. Should he climb into bed for his 8 hours kip? It was Monday tomorrow. Or should he stay where he was, back resting comfortably against the wall, and enjoy the rest of today? Decisions. The trouble with sleeping was, how could you enjoy something when you didn't know you were doing it? He yawned again and stayed where he was, sprawled across the bed. It had been a great day. It was his birthday. He was 1 year older and 50 pounds richer. Dad and Mum, Grandad and Sister Kim, Brother Tom and his wife had all decided that he was difficult to buy presents for. So he got money instead. £50, 5,000 pence, all in a single note. Amazing! 2 months' pocket money in one bit of coloured paper with the Queen on one side and someone else on the other. Was it the Duke of Wellington? It didn't matter, really. It could be Dracula, provided the numbers matched. The thing was, what to do with it? He could buy several hundred Mars bars, or a new set of handlebars for his bike, except that his bike was a write-off ever since it had piled up on the canal bridge when the roads were icy last winter. Now it lay on its side, wheels rusting, in the backyard behind the Caravan where Alec's granddad lived. Granddad's Caravan was almost a write-off as well. It had a pile of bricks where one wheel ought to be. Now, he could put the £50 down for a new bike. It would only take him till 2010 to pay off the rest. But by that time, he'd be able to buy a Ferrari, if he did well at school and got a good job. If he could get a job, that is. Oh, come on now. No point in thinking about disasters when he was supposed to be gloating over triumphs. Because today had been a good day for the home side. Right now, as the teams left the pitch, the score, on the scorecard Alec kept in his mind every day, was triumphs 2, disasters 0. For it wasn't only his birthday. His sister Kim had just got engaged to Archie Blaggett. Now, you may ask, why should a bloke be over the moon because his sister's engaged? In fact, Alec didn't understand why Kim wanted to marry Archie Blaggett anyway. But there was no accounting for taste, and it wasn't his funeral. Wedding. Alec lifted both legs lazily in the air and kicked. He had this off to a fine art. If he lay on his bed and kicked out, his trousers would shoot down his legs, over his feet, and on a good day, they'd fly through the air and land on top of his old cupboard. But today it didn't work, and his trousers stuck round his ankles. His legs dropped back on the bed, his eyes began to close. The good thing about Kim getting married was this. She and Archie Blaggett were buying a flat. So in 3 months' time, she would move out. That was ages away, but when she did, Grandad could move into the house. That meant no more worry about someone from the council finding out that Grandad was living in an old caravan. What's more, Grandad and Alec could have a chat every night before bed. Grandad knew about 2 million funny stories and rhymes, better than having your own video outfit. Grandad was great. So, there it was. Triumphs 2, disasters 0. A terrific day. Now, back to his £50. Should he buy something good right away, or should he get a premium bond and win £100,000? That was 500,000 Mars bars. How many bikes was it? On the other hand, he thought, supposing he didn't win anything. Decisions. Nope, he'd leave the £50 where it was. This evening, he'd put it in a safe place. He'd opened the drawer in his cupboard and got out the old beer can which was tucked away at the back. He'd dusted and polished the old can, then he'd tucked the banknote down the hole in the lid. No one else would think of looking in there. Come to that, no one else would keep an old beer can with the label almost worn off in their cupboard, would they? The reason was, this was no ordinary can. Last year, he'd found it by accident behind a wall in Bowen Street. And when he'd taken it to his secret hideout in an old derelict factory they called the Tank, he'd rubbed the can, and out popped a genie from old Baghdad, no kidding, called Abu Salam. Abu and Alec had had a great time last summer, even though he was only a third-class genie and a lot of his spells turned out to be disasters rather than triumphs. Still, Abu was magic. Really, and Alec missed him a lot. He half opened his eyes and looked across the darkened room. He could dimly see the can where it stood on top of the cupboard. Wonder what Abu was doing now. He'd said he must sleep for 100 years to recover his strength, but Alec felt he was only joking. Betty was over there way back in time in old Baghdad, noshing kebab and lamb's tails and sheep's eyes. He wished Abu were here now. Since last summer, Alec had learned a thing or two. He wouldn't make so many mistakes if a genie ever turned up again in Bugletown. He'd know what to ask for this time. His eyes closed again. His head and shoulders slid off the wall and collapsed onto his pillow, while his legs hung over the side of the bed. In a minute, he was fast asleep. No, he wasn't. He was wide awake. Where was he? It was broad daylight and someone was banging on the door. "You, Alec, get up, it's 8:30. It was Mum. It was Monday. He'd overslept. He'd be late for school. In a panic, he leapt up and dived for the door, but the trousers round his ankles tripped him up. He crashed into the cupboard. The can rolled off the top and donged him on the head. Oh no. The game had started again, and his team were losing already. Chapter 2. The Late Alec Bowden. Suddenly, Alec knew what he ought to buy for that 50 quid. A single ticket to Land's End with a quick jump off the edge to follow. He'd been warned by Monty Cartwright about coming late to school. "Bowden, I know you're in poor condition, but it's only 10 minutes' walk. Try getting up in time. Or else." As he hauled up his trousers, he wasn't sure whether he had them on back to front. Feeling his way into the bathroom, he caressed his face with a damp flannel, then slid downstairs to the kitchen, where Mum had his breakfast on the table. "Your jumper's on inside out, Alec." "I'll give over, Mum. What does it matter?" He slumped in his chair and reached for his fork. Mum moved like lightning. She leaned over, pulled his jumper over his head just as he lifted the fork to his face. She had it down again the right way round before the bacon reached his mouth. How she did it, Alec would never know. "Well, love, are Kim and Archie engaged? What do you think?" "I'm trying not to, Mum." "Get off. You know you're pleased. We're having a party next week. You'll like that, Alec." "Hey, in the pub, Mum?" "Not likely. We'll have a quiet one here at home. I expect Kim will let you invite a friend if you like. How about that nice Mrs. Wallace's daughter? What's her name?" Alec knew when his leg was being pulled. He looked down at his plate. "Eulalia," he said. He could tell Mum was smiling at him. He finished his food without looking up, then scrambled for the door. He had his jacket on and was outside while Mum was still calling after him about something he'd forgotten. He was late enough as it was. Going through the backyard, he looked at the old green and white battered caravan where Grandad lived. The curtains were still drawn. He must be asleep. Lucky old Grandad. Alec gave a wave to the window and charged off down the road. Last year, on days when he was late for school, he could cut through the old factory lot, the tank, go across the canal there and squeeze through the planks in the railway arches into Bowen Street. Once in Bowen Street and he was almost on top of the school gate. It cut 5 minutes at least off the trip. But that shortcut was finished now. The loose planks in the railway arches were all fixed tight with 6-inch nails. Mind you, it wasn't just the shortcut. He used to spend hours messing about inside the old buildings in the tank. It was there he'd first met Abu Salam last summer. At the top of the slope where the main road ran over the canal bridge, Alec stopped for breath. That was a mistake. He knew as soon as he did it. These days you didn't breathe in anywhere near the canal if you could help it. It was so bunged up with mud and rubbish there was hardly any water left. And the more the sun shone on it, the smellier it got. When summer really arrived, it was going to be unbearable. Holding his breath, he ran down the main road through the shops. At the corner by the Three Fiddlers pub, he let his breath go again because his chest hurt. Across the road, bulldozers and excavators were at work. This was always exciting to watch, but there was a snag. They were filling in the old waste ground where the air raid shelters had been. They were going to build a supermarket. Another good messing about place was vanishing. As he turned into School Lane, the school gates were closing. Monty Cartwright stood outside on the pavement, watch in hand, giving late arrivals at the Bugletown Comprehensive Ball the old countdown. Alec put on one desperate effort and just made it. Monty glared at him but said nothing, and in a few seconds Alec was inside the school. Disasters won, triumphs won. His form 3F was on the first floor. He flung himself up the stairs and along the passage. Through the glass door panels, he could see Mr. Foster's grey head bent over his table. Hey, they were still doing registration. He threw himself at the door, burst in, tripped over the outstretched leg of a girl who sat just inside, and rolled, bag and all, in a bundle up to Mr. Foster's feet. The form tutor looked vaguely over his glasses. He was very good-hearted, was Mr. Foster, but the most absent-minded teacher in the world. Goodness me, look who's rolled in. What can we do for you, Alec? That was strange, thought Alec. Unlike Mr. Foster to be sarky. He struggled to his feet and looked at the teacher. Sorry I'm late, sir, he said. Behind him the class burst out laughing. You'll be even later, Alec. You're not with me anymore. You're along the corridor in 3H with Mr. Hitchin. Alec stared. Then it hit him. Oh, no. This was going to be one of those days. Disasters 2, triumphs 1. Chapter 3. The Smile on the Face of the Cobra. Alec gathered his gear and staggered out of 3F and down the corridor again. He really needed that single ticket to Land's End. What he'd forgotten in all the excitement over the weekend was that today was the big changeover. All the forms in his year were being swapped around. Some moved in, some moved out. Every form was supposed to be mixed ability. That was what they called it. Alec felt he was mixed ability already. One day he felt bright, next day he felt dim. Sometimes in the morning, for 20 minutes, he felt brilliant. Then he felt thick for the rest of the day. Some teachers made him feel intelligent, others made him feel he ought to be traded in. Mr. Hitchin, his new form tutor in 3H, was a PE teacher, newly come to Bugletown. He was dead keen. Morning baths with ice on the top, 100-mile jogs before breakfast. But he seemed all right otherwise. Old Foster was okay, but he was so absent-minded you never knew quite where you were with him. Absent-minded? Alex stopped in his stride. He'd charged past 3H and was nearly at the end of the corridor. As he trundled back, he remembered something else. The big changeover meant new people in his class. Spotty Sam Taylor, for one. That was the bad news. Spotty Sam wasn't mixed at all. He was thick and nasty with it. But then there was the good news. Eulalia Wallace and her brother Ginger were in his class as well. Alec looked through the door. By the window on the far side he could see Ginger, Eulalia, and their mates, in 2 rows. There was one empty place just behind Eulalia. Without thinking, Alex swung the door open and buzzed in. Mr. Hitchin, broad-shouldered, red-headed and freckled, looked up. Ah, the late Mr. Bowden. What about knocking? Sorry, sir. You're late. Sorry, sir. I went to 3F by mistake. Tell me the old story. There are 2 places left. Take your pick, but get a move on. Alec was halfway across the room to the empty desk behind Eulalia when he saw out of the corner of his eye Ronnie Smith wave to another empty place 2 rows away. But who was in the next seat? Sam Taylor. Alec hesitated only for a split second, then tumbled into the seat behind Eulalia. She turned her dark, handsome face and grinned at him. Hey, Skinny, didn't your teeth maid work this morning? She whispered. He turned red and began to shuffle his books about. Well, he'd remembered them all, he thought, checking his timetable. He relaxed and looked about him. The day had taken a turn for the better. His side had let in 2 today, but they'd chalked up 2 as well. He'd got a corner seat where he could look out of the window, over the schoolyard and onto the big patch of waste ground where the old shelters were, and watch the crane and dumpers at work. Great. Then he looked in front of him at Eulalia. That was a sight better than sitting with Ronnie Smith behind him and nosy little Alice Rogers in front. Just then he heard someone say, quite distinctly, though quietly, "That one likes black magic, does he?" He turned. Just across the gangway was a new face. A lad his own size, with pale face, bristling black hair and sharp eyes. "Shut your face," said Alec, louder than he meant to. "Bowden, put a cork in it." called Mr. Hitchin. "Come in here late and start pushing the rest of the class around?" Alec started to protest, then gave up. What did it matter? But it did. At break time, as he strolled out into the yard in the sunshine, feeling at ease with the world, he ran into the new lad again. He knew his name now. Gary Barker. Barker stood in front of him and smiled. Well, sort of smiled. Rather like the way a cobra looks at his dinner. "Don't tell me to shut my face," he began pleasantly. "I'll say what I like," answered Alec, facing up. Barker was nasty, but he wasn't all that big. Then behind Gary's shoulder, Alec saw Spotty Sam. So that was it, eh? Little and large. Barker stirred it, and Spotty Sam cleaned up. Barker reached out and twisted Alec's shirt front. "Listen, we were leaving that place empty on purpose." "What place?" said Alec, but he knew. "We thought Wallace and his crowd ought to have a bit of air round them. Get it?" "Get knotted," said Alec, and turned his back on Barker. He walked away across the yard, his insides curling up slightly and bracing himself in case anyone moved. Nothing happened. But he had a feeling it was going to before long. 3-2 for the away side, he thought. Chapter 4. Who's a Clever Little Boy? Gary Barker left Alec alone for the rest of that day, didn't even look at him. But Alec knew he'd been filed away somewhere in that cunning mind, while Gary got his jollies elsewhere. Barker was quite a performer. After break in maths, he embarrassed Miss Fortis by spotting a mistake on the board. 10 minutes later, up went his hand again, pointing out another error. It was only after she'd been through the whole calculation again twice, while the whole class watched, that she found she was right this time. "Sorry, miss," said Barker meekly. Miss Fortis looked at him and said nothing. Barker kept quiet in geography, but in general science he held the lesson up a couple of times by asking innocently, with his head on one side, "How can you prove that, sir?" Mr. Jameson was not embarrassed, but he eyed Barker warily and answered as if he didn't know what the game was. He seemed to be weighing the new boy up, but by now the class had got into the act and was waiting for fun. Alec even forgot his dislike for Barker in admiration for the way his mind worked. Spotty Sam got so excited by it all that towards the end of the lesson he came out of his coma and tried to do a turn all by himself. Mr. Jameson was talking about gravity and the rate at which objects fell through space. Up went Spotty's hand. "How can we prove that, sir?" Mr. Jameson looked at Sam a moment, then said, "If you can't bear to wait for the practical tomorrow, you can borrow my stopwatch and jump off the roof. But remember to give us a shout as you pass the window." The class exploded. Spotty Sam looked at Barker. Alec could see the wheels going round. Where did I go wrong? But Barker knew how far to go with his little games, and the afternoon drifted past without anything else happening until the final period, history. It was Tweedy Harris. Alec tried to pay close attention. He wasn't going to risk getting the sharp edge of Tweedy's tongue. If he could get through the day without any more aggro, he'd call it a draw. Tweedy was droning on about ancient Rome. His voice was monotonous, and Alec's mind began to wander. He looked out of the window at the distant building site. The sun's rays caught the metal of the giant crane and flashed in his eyes. He turned round just as Barker spoke. "Sir, funny that, what you were saying about all those people in other countries making out they were Romans?" Tweedy's eyebrows went up. "Funny, Barker? Not at all. Every empire has nationality problems. Everyone wants to belong to the home country. There are great advantages." "Ah, but when they all started moving in on Rome, that was when the empire went down the pan, wasn't it?" The class went quiet. Alec saw Eulalia's shoulders move. He guessed she knew what Barker was getting at and didn't like it. He turned and looked at Barker, wishing he could think of something quick to squash him with, but his brain was paralyzed. Barker's eye met Alec again, and Alec looked away. Said Tweedy. "I suggest you try that one out in current affairs, Barker, while we go back to the 3rd century AD. Alec sneaked another look round. Barker wasn't actually polishing his nails on his jacket, but there was a little smile round his mouth. Alec felt uncomfortable. Having Barker in the same class was going to be very nasty. Chapter 5. Where My Caravan Has Rested. When school was over, Alec set off smartly. At the gate, amid a crowd of other kids, he passed Eulalia and Ginger, gave them a quick wave, and ran down School Lane. He sneaked to look round. Neither Spotty nor Barker was in sight. Reaching the end of School Lane and turning into the main road, he paused for a moment to get his breath back and to check he had all his gear. Out of the side of his eye, he saw a figure just behind him. It was Spotty Sam, he was sure. His heart stopped a second, and he made ready to take off at full speed. But then there was no one there at all. The nearest kids were miles away down the road. He must be going light-headed. He took a deep breath, then set off again at a steady trot. The sun was going down now, but the afternoon had been warm. As he reached the canal bridge, the pong from the oozy water underneath hit him like a cloud of gas. It was disgusting. He didn't stop for another breath, but clamped his mouth tight and galloped down from the bridge to the turn-off for the Crown Hill estate. Once again he stopped, and again he saw behind him that tall figure, quick like a shadow. Turning completely round, he looked up and down. But there was only a mum pushing her pram, and she looked too tired and fed up to play tricks on anyone. He turned back and walked onto the corner. Whoever it was, if there was someone, was materializing and dematerializing like Abu. Funny, that was about the 10th time he'd thought about the genie today. There it was again. He swung round and shouted. But the pavement behind him was empty now. Why should anyone want to tail him? The day's excitement must be getting to him. He reached his own road and stepped off the curb to cross. But right at that moment a ferocious honking made him leap back. A big lorry drove past, in a cloud of diesel fumes, the driver in the cab shaking his head at Alec. Alec started after the truck as it vanished round the corner. Funny, he must be off his runners today. He could have sworn that on the back of that lorry was a Caravan, old and battered, green and white. It looked just like the Caravan that stood in their backyard, the one that Grandad used as his bedsit. A chilling thought struck him. Was it Grandad's Caravan? It couldn't be. They were always threatening to get rid of it, but they'd never done it, because there wasn't room. But supposing... Alec broke into a gallop again along the pavement, rushed in through the wide entrance to the house. The old gate was open, but then it was never shut. He hurried on, hoping and fearing at the same time, fingers crossed, legs crossed, wishing. Wishing was a waste of time. As he got round the corner of the house to the back door, he could see. The Caravan had gone. All that was left was the pile of bricks that used to hold up one side of the Caravan where the wheel was broken. And behind it was the wreck of his bike. "Oh no," groaned Alec. "Triumphs 2, disasters 4. Chapter 6. Here Comes the Bride. Alec stood and stared at the bare patch of ground and the pile of bricks. This was a cosmic disaster. If the Caravan was gone, where would Grandad sleep tonight? Answer, in the house. In whose room would Grandad sleep? Answer, Muggins's. Where would Muggins go? Answer, into the box room at the top of the house. The box room was like a cell for small prisoners in solitary. There was just room for his bed and cupboard. His desk and all his special stuff would have to go out in the shed. Perhaps they'd even tipped his gear out already. Alec rushed in at the back door. "Hey, Mom!" he shouted. Then he stopped. The house was being turned upside down. Mum, Dad and Kim were bustling to and fro with pieces of furniture, mattresses, blankets and bedding. He tried to get through, but the door to the stairs was blocked with Grandad's chest of drawers and Alec's old desk. "Hey, what's going on?" he yelled. As if he didn't know. But nobody took any notice. Mum came down the stairs with a pile of sheets in her arms, dumped them on top of the chest of drawers, then vanished again. Upstairs he could hear Mum and Kim shout at each other. Then Dad's voice trying to put both of them right. Then Mum and Kim sorting Dad out. It was the Bowden family in action, pure chaos. Then Alec remembered something else. His can with a £50 note in it. He'd left it on top of the desk this morning. "You, Mum!" he shouted, leaning across the furniture to look up the stairwell. What have you done with my can?" The noise upstairs went on. No one took any notice. He pitched his voice higher. "Mom!" Kim stuck her head out at the top of the stairs. "Give over yowling, Alec. Can't you see we're busy up here? You'll get your tea in a minute." Alec fumed. "It's not me tea, you daft oink. It's me can." "You what?" shrieked Kim. "I expect we threw it out. There was any amount of old lumber in your room." Alec exploded. He rushed across the kitchen from the back door and took a flying kick at the chest of drawers. His foot missed the end, skated off the corners, and his shin bone caught the edge of one of the drawers, which was open, showing a tasteful display of Grandad's long johns. "Oh!" howled Alec. "Hey, lad, I didn't think you knew that word." Holding onto his leg, tears of rage and agony in his eyes, Alec hopped round in the direction of the quiet old voice. Seated on a stool by the sink, a cup in his hand, was Grandad. He had on his black suit trousers, a pyjama top, and his old army greatcoat, which he still used as a dressing gown. "Want a cup of tea, Alec?" the old man winked. "Oh, Grandad, it's my can." "I know, lad. Everything's upside down." Pointing to another stool, Grandad poured Alec a cup of tea, and reaching behind the washing-up pile on the draining board, he lifted out a plate with mini pork pies and cheese biscuits on it. "I saved you some. Eat up, lad." Alec slung down his school bag and slumped onto the stool next to Grandad. He was hungry. Before he could think, he'd wolfed the meat pies and most of the biscuits. "Oh, Grandad, I'm sorry. Have you had any yet?" "Get off with your bother, lad. I don't want any. I've stopped growing. Dig in. Fill your boots." The old man gave him a sly grin, then reached behind the draining board and plonked something on the tabletop. "Was that what you were getting so aerated about?" On the table stood the can, and sticking out of the hole in the top was the brown and white edge of the £50 note. Alec let all his breath go at once. "Oh, thanks, Grandad, you're magic. You've made my day. You've saved my day. It looked like a walkover for disasters." "A witch for what?" Grandad reached over and ruffled Alec's hair. "Look, I'm sorry about the turn-up. I told your mum I'd have the box room." "Get off, Grandad. You know I wouldn't have that. But why is it all happening today? I thought our Kim was moving out in August and you'd move in then." "Well, things have accelerated, Alec. You know old Blaggett wasn't all that happy about their Archie marrying our Kim. Can't think why, a lovely, well-bred girl." "What, her?" sputtered Alec through a cheese biscuit. "You must have her mixed up with Dracula's aunt." "That'll do from you." Kim, still in her overalls from work, her hair covered in a scarf, face red with exertion, leaned over the furniture barrier by the door. "Pass us a cup of tea. I'm spitting feathers." Grandad shook his head, poured out a cup and gave it to Alec to pass over. Kim took it from him and grinned at Alec. "It wasn't me Archie's dad was worried over. It was this family. Who could blame him? One spends his time singing dirty songs at the Senior Citizens Club. The other uses a tin can as a dummy." "Very funny," said Alec. "But why all the upset today? Couldn't it wait?" "Well, Archie's dad accepted the invitation to our engagement do next Saturday." "What? Old Blaggett coming here?" "That's it," put in Grandad. "He's generously decided to forget that you and your friends dumped him in the canal last summer. It's all going to be sweetness and light. A big society wedding, the cream of Bugletown." He grinned and suddenly began to sing to the tune of the wedding march. "Here comes the bride, large, fat and wide. See how she wobbles from side to side." Kim snatched up a duster and flung it at Grandad, who ducked and let it fly into the sink. "Anyway," said Alec, "so old Blaggett's coming here. What difference does that make?" Kim looked at him pityingly. "You know as well as I do Grandad shouldn't be living in that old wreck out there. And since we don't have enough bedrooms, he'd have to live in a home, wouldn't he? And if Mr. Blaggett came here, what's he going to say?" "Well," said Alec, "he could pretend he hasn't seen the Caravan, couldn't he? What with all the street in? Don't be gormless, lad." "Not with him due to be chosen mayor next month," added Grandad. "Mustn't stop his gallop, must we? Today Bugletown, tomorrow the world." "If you think that's funny, Grandad, you can think again. snapped Kim. She turned to Alec. I know it's inconvenient, but it's only for a few months. Few months, that's all, protested Alec, but Kim ploughed on. And we ought to have got rid of that old flea pit on wheels years ago. It's a fire risk. It's a health risk. Talking of health risks, said Grandad, what's your future dad-in-law, Councillor Blaggett, going to do about that canal? Yes, added Alec, that pond's terrible. The whole estate smells when the weather gets warm. Kim made a face. Archie was telling me they've started cleaning it up. They've got men working on it. But it takes time, and you know the council's short of funds. Time, snorted Grandad. They only started now because the elections are coming up. And you notice they started up the Bishop's Road end, where his worship lives. If I can interrupt this political broadcast... Dad's bald figure appeared on the stairway behind Kim. He had on his jacket and peaked cap, ready for the late turn. He heaved the chest of drawers to one side and came into the kitchen. If there's a cup of tea left in the pot, Dad, he said. He took the cup Grandad poured out and drank it standing by the back door. It always seemed funny to Alec when his dad called Grandad Dad. Hey, lad, just switch the radio on, will you? I'll catch the news before I go. Too late, Dad, said Kim. You'll only get the local stuff on Regional Round. Alec switched on. There was a burst of music, then the announcer's voice came through with the headlines. A mystery figure caused panic in Bugletown's shopping centre today. Bugletown residents claim to have a black panther in their midst. Chapter 7. Stone Cold in the Market. Alec's mother looked round the corner of the stairway. What's all this, then? Have we all stopped work? Oh, hello, Alec. Have you had your tea, love? I'm sorry. Oh, shush a bit, our Mum, interrupted Kim. We're trying to listen to the radio. That rubbish. Yes, Connie, it's something about Bugletown, said Dad. The announcer's voice came through again. Shoppers screamed and ran for cover in Bugletown when a naked man, breathing heavily, ran through one of the arcades off the main street. Shoppers gave chase, but the naked runner escaped, apparently taking with him a woman's nightdress from a boutique. Oh, kinky, said Kim. Now you hush, said Mum. Miss Archer, manageress of the Little Nell boutique, told our reporter... A woman's voice followed. Well, he was young, he was black, and he was, very well set up. Trust her to notice, began Kim, then stopped at Mum's frown. Oh, yes, and he was wet. I mean, he looked as if he'd just jumped out of the bath. The family looked at one another and burst out laughing. Now came the announcer's voice again. During the afternoon, a number of sightings of the Black Panther, as he's quickly been named, were reported to Bugletown Police. Some anxiety has been expressed that this may be the prelude to an outbreak of muggings and other assaults. Oh, honestly, burst out Kim. Did you ever hear such tripe? Will you be quiet? Snapped Mum. A spokesman for Bugletown Police said early this evening, there is no cause for alarm. The young man seems to have disappeared. We're treating this as a practical joke. Dad switched off the radio. I wouldn't call stealing from shops a joke, said Mum. Ah, get away, said Kim. Look at all the publicity Lizzie Archer's going to get. I bet she put that bloke up to it. You, Kim, what a thing to say. Miss Archer's a respectable... Grandad suddenly choked on his tea. Now, Dad, went on Mum, but Grandad interrupted hastily. No, it wasn't Miss Archer I was thinking about. I was just wondering, what did he want a nightie for? Well, if you were in the altogether, you'd pick up anything, especially in this weather. Ah, but what was he doing starkers in the first place? Asked Alec. Good point, said Grandad. Anyway, Dad pushed his hat up on his forehead. I haven't got time to argue the toss. He went to the back door and half waved his hand as he stepped out. See you later. 'Tis a bit funny, said Alec. Hey, you know, a couple of times this afternoon I thought I saw someone behind me, but when I turned round they vanished. It was someone big and dark. I'll give over, laughed Kim. You're making it up. I'm not. Alec was indignant. Alec, love, said Mum. Now, you and Kim take that desk of yours down to the shed, while Grandad and I take his chest of drawers up to your room. Go on. There was no arguing with Mum when she said, "Go on," in that tone of voice. Reluctantly, Alec helped Kim to carry the old desk down to the shed at the bottom of the small garden. As they shuffled down the path, Kim looked at Alec and grinned. "I'm truly sorry about this, love, but it won't be for long. After August, you'll have the place to yourself. Look, I've taken one of the drawers out of my room and put it under your bed to hold your bits and pieces until I move out." Alec said nothing. As they walked back to the house, she put her arm round his shoulder and said coaxingly, "Shall we invite Eulalia next week? Would you like that?" Get off," said Alec gruffly. He escaped from her arm and ran inside and up the 2 short flights of stairs to the box room. He had to shove hard on the door to make space to slip through. Inside there was just room for the bed, his cupboard, and a chair. It was going to be sardine tight. Kneeling on the bed and stretching his neck, he could just see out of the tiny window, over the gardens and allotments at the back, to the big tarred fence around the old ruined buildings of the tank, and beyond that to the railway arches. He shrugged, slid off the bed, and tipped out his school books from his bag. There wasn't much homework, just history. With a bit of wriggling round, he could sit on the bed and do his writing on the top of the chair. As he got out his pen and started to write, he thought about the history lesson that day. Why did people like Gary Barker have to start stirring things? He thought about Eulalia and Ginger. Funny thing was, neither Barker nor Spotty Sam nor any of their mates had a go at them direct. They wouldn't dare. They just stirred it up with other people, like him, just because he was friends with you and Ginge. Well, Barker and Taylor could get stuffed. He was going to sit where he liked. Chapter 8. A Night Visitor. As Alec finished his homework, Mum called him down for supper. When he got into the kitchen, old Hetty Morris was there, drinking tea and gossiping as usual. She jerked her head towards the back door. "They reckon we ought to have patrols on the estate at night." "Whatever for?" asked Mum. "Well, with these darkies running round with nothing on, you're not safe at night." Kim made a face. Mum frowned at her. Then Grandad spoke. "Who's going to do the patrolling, Hetty? Shall I get out me old tin hat? Hey, and we could get out our gas masks. It'll be like old times." Hetty Morris looked at Grandad. "It's not funny, you know. Mr. Barker reckons if you let one thing go, something else'll happen, mugging and so on." "Barker? Who's he?" asked Mum. "Oh, they haven't long moved in," said Miss Morris, "but—" "Well, what's he shouting the odds for?" demanded Grandad. "Hey!" Alec leant forward, his mouth full. "I'll bet he's Gary Barker's dad. He's stirring it up at school as well." "That'll do from you," said Mum. Hetty Morris drank the rest of her tea and looked round. "I'll have to go." Grandad got to his feet. "I'll walk down the road with you, Hetty, just in case the old Black Panther turns up." "It's no laughing matter," grumbled Miss Morris. She turned round to Alec and his mum. "You think on. I reckon we've not heard the last of this." A bit later, after Hetty Morris and Grandad had gone, Alec went back up to his room and put his books away. With all the goings-on, time had flown. He'd missed a couple of programmes he'd wanted to watch. But then there was so much gear lying around you couldn't even see the telly, let alone watch it in comfort. It was going to be a very dodgy 3 months at home, he could see, to say nothing of what was going on at school. With that gloomy thought, he got ready for bed. When he'd washed and got into his pyjamas, he stood on the bed a moment and looked out. Poor old Abu had never managed to transform the tank that time with that last big spell of his. That was the one that took all his powers, so he had to have a long sleep to recover. Ah, well. He slid down into bed. Next minute he'd drifted away to sleep and he was dreaming. Abu and a load of genies from old Baghdad had turned up in Bugletown. They were chasing Gary Barker and Spotty Sam and Gary's dad all through the streets. Then the 3 of them jumped on a railway trolley and tried to escape down the line, like Keystone Cops in the silent movies. Suddenly he was awake. The room was pitch dark, but he knew he wasn't alone. By his bed, looking down at him, was a tall figure in a white robe. Alec passed out. Chapter 9. Support your local genie. Alec opened one eye. The room was still in darkness, but he was awake. He wasn't dreaming. And that ghostly figure was still there by his bed. "Get away!" he squeaked and pulled the bedclothes over his head. A second later, he couldn't help himself. He peeped out again. The figure bent over him. Now that Alec's eyes were more used to the darkness, he could see the face of a young lad, not much older than himself, but black and strongly built. He must be even bigger than Ginger. But what was he doing in that white robe? Suddenly he knew. It was the Black Panther. He dived under the covers again. But this time, a hand reached in and pulled off the cover. It was a cold hand. Alec jumped. He heard a strange clicking noise. There it was again. Then he realized the Black Panther was so cold his teeth were chattering. Whoever it was must still be dressed in that lady's nightdress he'd nicked from the boutique. No wonder he was shivering, wandering round like that. But how did he end up in Bowden's boudoir? The figure bent over him again. Alec didn't wait. He pushed back the bedclothes and tried to leap out of bed. That was difficult because there were only 6 square inches of floor space and the Black Panther was using them. What was more, he stood between Alec and the door. Now Alec heard that clicking noise again, louder this time. It was his own teeth that were chattering. "Who are you?" he whispered. The figure spoke. "Salam alaikum, O Effendi." "Alaikum salam," answered Alec without thinking. Then he went on, "Kifa halik? Ilhamdulillah, but alas, master, I am cold and hungry." Slowly light dawned in Alec's mind. He crawled to the end of the bed and switched on the light. The lad stood there, arms folded about him, trembling with cold. His face was somehow familiar. Alec burst out excitedly. "Hey, you're not the Black Panther. You're a genie like Abu." "Abu?" The boy's face brightened. "Abu Salam, the third-class genie from old Baghdad," added Alec. "Abu Salam is my father, oh master." "Hey, great! But don't call me master. I'm Alec. What's your name?" "Abdul." "Magic. Sit down, Abdul. A genie may not sit in the presence of a master. Now, don't go all formal on me, Abdul. Listen, did your dad send you over here to give me a hand?" "Dad? Hand?" "Father, Abu Salam. Did he send you to do spells for me?" Abdul shook his head. He looked more miserable. "Alas, I cannot make spells. I am not a full genie. I have not finished my lessons." "But why did your dad send you over here, then?" Abdul sat down on the bed and was silent a moment. Alec waited. Abdul hesitated. "Go on, don't be shy." "I am not shy. I am ashamed." "Ashamed? Get off. What for?" "It was by chance. It happened in the morning. I was in the Caliph's great bath, sporting with the maidens from the harem." "You little devil," chuckled Alec. But Abdul's face was straight. "My father found me. He was angry. I'll bet he was. He had the great book in his hand. He was studying for a test before the Grand Genie, and in his anger he uttered the spell 99, which he had been memorizing. Number 99, what's that? Transporting persons through space." "Good grief!" Alec shrieked with laughter, then clapped a hand over his own mouth to stop the row. "Don't tell me. He shot you over here, wet and dripping, and landed you right in the shopping centre. You've made news today." "News?" "Yeah, on the radio." "Radio? Oh, Christmas, we're going to have to educate you. Was it you following me today?" Abdul nodded. "But why were you running starkers through the town, you Burke? Couldn't you vanish, dematerialise?" Abdul looked pained. "Alas, since I came here, I have materialised and dematerialised many times. Can't you control it?" "No." "Can't you do any spells?" Abdul shook his head. "I am forbidden, for I am not yet old enough to take the great oath of obedience." "Oh, come on, you're among friends now. And alas, I cannot remember any." Alec groaned. "You can't even make a little meal for us like your dad used to." "I know. Ooh, I'm cold and hungry." Alec screwed up his face. "Well, you're a walking disaster. You're useless. You're a drag. A drag in drag, that's what you are. Drag? Oh, forget it. Look, Abdul, you get into bed. Go on, I order you. Get warm. I'll sneak downstairs and get something to eat. Alec slipped from the room and crept downstairs. For the first time in years, his luck was in. He nicked a couple of cold sausages from the fridge and got back again without even waking Mum. As he re-entered the room, it was empty. Abdul had gone. Alec peered round, whispering, "Hey, Abdul, where are you great Nana?" There was no answer. Alec looked round, then he had an inspiration. He reached up to the cupboard top and picked up the old can. He held it to his ear. From inside came the sound of quiet breathing. Abdul had taken over his old dad's tin bungalow. Alec finished the sausages himself. He deserved them, then climbed back into bed and soon was fast asleep. But while Alec slept, someone else in the room was putting in an urgent transfer charge call to old Baghdad. "Abu Salam is here. Who speaks?" "It is I, O father, your unhappy son Abdul." "Unhappy? How can that be?" "Father, I am cold, I am hungry. I am held in a metal dungeon, not fit for a dog." "Oh, not fit for a dog? In that can, O son, I spent many happy hours in the service of my master, Alec al-Bowden." "Aye, father, he is cruel and harsh." "How so?" "He commanded me to make food." "And?" "I could not." "Simple, O son. Spell number 24. "I cannot remember it, O father." "What said Alec?" "He said I was useless and a drag. He commanded me to vanish." "And?" "I could not." "Simple, O son. Spell number 30. "I cannot remember it, O father." "Sad, O son." "Father, I appear and disappear, I know not how. I ran through the bazaar naked and ashamed, and women pursued me." "Beware of women, my son, they will ruin thee." "But, father, I know not when and where I may appear." "That is of great interest, O son. Take good note. When you return, the Grand Genie will be pleased to hear your story." "Father, when may I return?" "In a little while, my son." "Father, was the Grand Genie angry when he heard you had used spell number 99 by chance?" "Ah, my son, the Grand Genie believes it was not by chance." "Father, was it by chance?" "Father, why are you laughing?" "Laughter is good for the heart, O son." "My heart is heavy, O father. I beg you, let me return." "Sleep well, my son. Eat well. When you have remembered your spells, we shall see if you may serve your master Alec. Then, after a while, you may return, take the oath, and be a true genie." "How long must I stay?"
"Oh, perhaps 7 years, my son."
7 years? Oh, no!"
"Farewell, son. Learn well, say little, hear much, see all, and beware of women. In that land where you now are, they are bold and do not wear the veil."
"But, father, when may I hear your voice again?"
"Son, do not call me. I shall call you."
Chapter 10. Not even a serviette. Alec woke early. He always did when there was something wrong, and he knew right away what it was as soon as he saw the old beer can lying on its side by his bed, full of useless genie. Old Abdul, well, young Abdul, must have had a restless night. What was he going to do with him? Well, for a start, he'd have to take the can to school. He couldn't have Abdul suddenly appearing here just dressed in his bare necessities. Then there was another problem, feeding him. If Abdul was anything like his dad, he'd have a hearty appetite, and Alec couldn't carry on nicking food from the fridge. He found that out as soon as he got downstairs. "Alec," his mother greeted him, "did you eat those cold sausages?"
Yes, Mum."
"Well, that was your breakfast, that was."
"I was hungry last night."
Alec filled himself a bowl of cereal and began to eat. "What, after that supper I made for you and Grandad?" His mother stared at him across the breakfast table.
"It's a common complaint at his age,"
came Kim's voice as she breezed through the kitchen, a piece of toast in one hand and the other arm halfway up the sleeve of her jacket.
"You'll just have to take him to the vet and get him dewormed."
"Pig," said Alec through a mouthful of cereal. "Spray that again, lad," retorted Kim, and charged out of the back door.
"I'm going to work your way this morning, Alec. I'll walk with you to the corner of School Lane if you like, said Mum. Oh, no thanks, Mum, answered Alec hastily. That he did not want, Abdul suddenly coming out naked and ashamed while he walked along the main road with his mum. Besides, he had urgent business. He began to get his gear together. Must remember shorts and trainers, there was PE today. Hey, maybe there'd be football. Or was that tomorrow? Just to be safe, he crammed his boots into his bag. One corner popped its seams and gaped open. No good stuffing Abdul in there as well. He slipped the can into his pocket and dashed out, calling "Ta-ra!" to Mum. Once he was over the bridge of Pongs above the canal, his first port of call was in the shopping arcade. He went into the little Nal boutique and handed over the nightdress to the manageress, telling her a yarn about finding it up on the estate, which was true, in a way. To his delight, she slipped him a quick couple of quid. Ah, well, that was the way to start the day. Triumphs 1, disasters 0, and the game only just started. Still, he had a use for his honesty money, for his next call was in Nick's cafe, where he bought a takeaway doner kebab. The smell was so appetizing, it made him hungry again. He slipped out of the cafe and looked around. The little side street was empty and quiet, though the main road was only a few yards away. He put his bag down and carefully got out the can. "Salam alaikum, O Abdul." "Alaikum salam," came the sleepy reply. "Grub up. Come forth or come fifth or whatever. I've got a kebab for you." There was a rustling noise from the can. Abdul must be sleeping wrapped up in that £50 note. Hope he hasn't put his big toe through the sheets. If he had to go on feeding this trainee genie, he'd go through his birthday money like a dose of salts. Oh well, he thought, no use fretting. He owed Abdul's dad many a tasty nosh, and that was a fact. But to his amazement and horror, when he looked up from his bag, there stood Abdul in front of him, rubbing his eyes with one hand and guarding his dignity with the other. "You great plonker! What did you do that for?" Alec looked round wildly. To his relief, the street was empty. He bent down again, delved in his bag, and jerked out his PE shorts. "Put these on double quick," he commanded. Abdul wasted no time. The shorts are about 10 sizes too small, but at least he looked decent. Like an Olympic runner out for an early morning jog, thought Alec. He grinned at Abdul, then held out the kebab. Abdul smiled shyly, then said, "My master must eat first." "No, mate," said Alec. "Just you finish up and be quick." He turned and kept watch while Abdul made a quick breakfast. It was just as well, because right at that moment, Alec saw someone appear in the side turning. He gawped. It was Eulalia carrying a shopping bag. He froze, tried to make himself look small, and whispered over his shoulder, "Hey, Abdul, vanish imshi, will you?" Oh no, Eulalia had seen him. She waved. He waved back and wished she'd go away, but she didn't. She came striding down the side alley. "Hey, vanish, will you?" he whispered desperately. "What's that?" Eulalia came up to him. "That's no way to talk to a lady. I thought you'd had an accident with your bag. Your gear's all on the ground." "You're in a mess, Skinny. Look, your gym shorts are on the pavement. What's up with you?" Alec, heart in mouth, looked round. Abdul had vanished. Chapter 11. Who's a Big Head? Dazed with his double good luck, Alec strolled down School Lane, chatting to Eulalia. For once, it didn't even bother him that he had to look up slightly to talk to her. She was tall and slim, and it seemed funny that she was only the same age as him. He steered the conversation around to Kim's engagement, then very casually asked her if she would be coming to the party. She chuckled and looked sideways at him. "You dating me, Skinny?" Alec went red. He always did that at the wrong time. "No, I mean—" She nudged him and grinned. "Your Kim's already asked Ma and me, and Ginger." "Oh." He didn't know what to make of that. They were about 20 yards from the school gate when Alec was aware of someone coming up on the inside of the pavement and gradually forcing them off into the road. Without looking round, he said, "Knock it off, will you?" "Oh dear, isn't he nasty? He's frightening me." Gary Barker, Spotty Sam and their mates had pushed past them, and now they were slowing down, crowding back on Eulalia and Alec. He saw what it was all about, the old trick. You back up on someone and give them a crafty heel without anyone in front seeing what you're up to. Barker's foot came back, poised in the air. Alec could see the studs on the soles gleaming. Eulalia spoke. "You try that, Barker, and you're going to need a new foot." They turned at that. They didn't know what to do next. They didn't have a rule for a girl getting tough, but they were really after him. That was what it was all about. He braced himself and gripped his bag tighter. He'd have a go at Gary first and try to break through. He didn't think they'd touch Eulalia. Nothing happened. Spotty Sam and Gary just walked on. Alec saw why. Standing at the school entrance were Ginger and 4 of his mates from Boner Street. It was the wrong time for Barker's little caper. Alec's insides warmed up again. "Hey, you," said Ginger. "Where have you been? Ma's been waiting for that shopping." Eulalia nodded to Alec and walked on quickly. Alec sauntered into the schoolyard just behind Ginger's mob. So far, so good. But not for long, he knew. Somehow or other in the line-up, he found himself next to Gary Barker. The weasel must have worked his way through the crowd. Without moving his lips, Gary said with that small, unpleasant smile, "I'm going to get you when the Jamaican army isn't on duty, Bowden. When I've done with you, you're going to need your 6-month service." Alec pretended he hadn't heard. He wished he hadn't, but he had. Half the morning went by quietly enough, but after break, Gary Barker decided it was time to liven things up. He picked on Mr. Jameson's lesson. Mr. Jameson was talking, or rather chatting, which was his style, which Alec liked a lot. It was about evolution. He showed slides of skulls and different shapes from earliest human beings right through to modern people. "We go on changing," said Mr. Jameson, "but it's mostly inside our heads these days. The big difference between us and people tens of thousands of years ago is technology, not biology." Gary Barker's hand went up. "I read somewhere, sir, that an American professor says there's a difference in brain size, like between different sorts of people. I mean, if he's right, it'd explain a lot of things." "Very interesting, Gary," replied Mr. Jameson, eyeing Barker carefully. "But in fact, the difference is between individuals, not between different groups of people. And though some people do have bigger brains, it doesn't necessarily make them smarter. Most of us have brains somewhere around 1400 cc's, whoever we are." He grinned suddenly. "It doesn't matter, for example, how big your head is, really. I mean, Mr. Taylor there has a bigger head than you, but I'm sure he doesn't look down on you for that." The class began to laugh. "Apart from anything else, you can't possibly know whether you have a bigger brain than your neighbour until you're both dead. Then the information isn't much use to you, is it?" The laughter spread. Alec sneaked a look at Barker. His face was paler and his lips were tighter. For a second, Alec felt sorry for him. He always did when someone got put down in class. But it was only for a second. He knew what was going on inside that sharp little mind, all 1400 cc's of it. Barker would have his own back. Not on Mr. Jameson, of course, but on someone else. Chapter 12. Caught in the Undergrowth. Alec knew how to take a hint. At the end of school, he was out of the schoolyard before Gary Barker had got his hit squad together. 5 minutes later, he was round the corner into the main road. Another 5 minutes and he was over the bridge of Pongs, holding his nose with his fingers as he ran. He reached home 10 minutes after he'd cleared the school gate. Not quite good enough for the Guinness Book of Records, but not bad for him. He was still on the run when he came in through the open back door to the kitchen. It was crowded. Mum and Kim in aprons, sleeves rolled up and pink in the face, were bobbing between table and cooker. The air was full of the smell of baking. Alec's stomach rumbled at the thought of it. But no one took any notice of him. There was an argument going on. On his stool by the sink sat Grandad, a cup of tea in one hand and an Eccles cake in the other. In the far corner, wedged between the kitchen cabinet and the larder door, sat old Miss Morris. It was baking hot in the kitchen, but she still wore her raincoat and scarf. She spoke between mouthfuls of tea. "He's been seen again," she was saying, glaring at Grandad. "Who has, love?" asked Mum, pausing for breath and leaning on the rolling pin. "That darky." "Who?" demanded Grandad. "The one they call the Black Panther." "Get away with you, Hetty, Black Panther." Grandad choked on his Eccles cake. "It's true," Miss Morris went on. He was seen by Margie Carter outside the Turkish cafe off the main road near the Three Fiddlers, standing there as bold as brass, eating a takeaway."
"What? In his birthday suit?" asked Grandad.
"Grandad?" said Mum, shocked.
"No," answered Miss Morris. "He had a pair of shorts on." "Well, how did she know it was him? It could have been somebody jogging."
Miss Morris looked uncomfortable.
"Well, he vanished before she could get a closer look."
"I bet she tried hard enough," said Kim. "Kim, get on with those sausage rolls," said Mum hastily. She turned round. "Alec, don't stand there making big ears. Go on up to your room. You can see we're busy here."
"What about my tea?"
"I've put something up there. You'll have to eat by yourself this week till we've finished baking for Kim's party." Alec made a face, sidled past, and climbed up the stairs to the box room. On the chair by his bed was a plate with sausage rolls and a piece of chocolate cake on it. Great. He slung his bag and jacket on the bed and reached for the grub when he heard his mother call up the stairs.
"You, Alec, wash your hands."
Reluctantly, he trundled down the stairs and into the bathroom. Swiftly he washed and climbed back again to his cell. Now for a feast. Those sausage rolls were still warm and they smelt great. Not any more, they didn't. As he squeezed through the doorway and flopped down onto the bed, he saw the plate was empty. For a second he was baffled. Then he knew.
"Abdul, you gannet, you noshed a lot."
"1,000 pardons," came a humble voice from the corner of the room. "I thought my master had provided that small mouthful for his servant."
"Small mouthful, you two-legged vulture? That was my tea."
Alec took a deep breath.
"Abdul, you're hopeless. What are you?"
"Hopeless, oh master."
"Oh, give over with your master rubbish. You're going to eat me out of house and home."
"I am so hungry, oh Alec."
"That's nothing to what I am. When I think of those smashing feasts your dad made for me."
"Dad?"
"Father, Abu Salam." Suddenly, Abdul appeared, sitting on the edge of Alec's bed. "Hey, what did you do that for?"
"Do what, oh Alec?"
"Materialize."
Abdul looked embarrassed, and picking up Alec's pyjama jacket, draped it round him.
"I know not why. One moment I was not, next moment I was." "Well, you'd better wasn't, and quick. We've got to go out and get some more to eat. My master, Alec, is bountiful. Get lost, it's for me, not you."
Alec took the beer can from his school jacket pocket. He poked around inside with a pencil and fished out the precious £50 note. It looked somewhat the worse for wear. This was where his hope of a big fortune began to go west. Not only was this genie no help, he was a liability.
"You've been using this as a ground sheet, haven't you, Abdul?"
said Alec as he smoothed out the banknote. The Queen looked up at him disapprovingly. "Sorry, Your Majesty," he muttered, and slid the note respectfully into his pocket.
"Now, down to Nick's for a crafty Adana. But first, you've got to wasn't, Abdul. You can't go down the main road in pyjamas."
He stared round, baffled. The room was empty. Abdul wasn't again. As Alec sneaked through the kitchen again, Miss Morris had gone, but the argument went on. Now they were talking about the Great Pong. Grandad was saying,
"About time Blaggett's mob did something about it. Somebody ought to tell him. I've a good mind to myself."
Kim, who stood by the sink, rounded on the old man.
"Now you look here, Grandad. I won't have you starting anything when our artist dad comes here on Saturday."
Her face was flushed.
"It's taken a lot to get him to come, and I'm not having my party spoilt."
Alec took his chance to slide out by the back door and set off down the road. At Nick's cafe, he bought 2 big takeaway donors. It made a big hole in his banknote, but so what? Then he crossed the junction to the waste ground where the shelters had been. He wasn't risking any of Miss Morris's cronies spying on his evening meal. The big building site which had taken up most of the waste ground was silent now. The huge machines stood like monsters behind the wire mesh fence. Alec found a hollow among the bushes and piles of rubble just a few yards from the road. The evening was warm and the grass was dry. He settled down comfortably and opened up the supper. Taking the can from his pocket, he placed it on the ground. "Grub up, Abdul." There was a faint sound, and then one of the kebabs rose in the air and began to vanish in great bites. The sight and the spicy smell suddenly reminded Alec of Abdul's father, Abu.
"Shukran jazilan, many thanks, oh Alec."
Crikey! Alec jumped. There was Abdul sitting on the grass with a big smile on his face and nothing else on. At the sight of his brown, handsome face, Alec grinned. "Do you know what they call you round here, Abdul?" Abdul shook his head. "The Black Panther." "Why, oh Alec?" "Well, because you appear and disappear like magic." Abdul began to laugh. He chortled, chuckled, threw back his head. The sound rose in the evening air, merry and loud. "Hey, shut up! Put a sock in it, Abdul." "Sock? I mean, be silent." Alec looked round him in alarm, if anyone should hear. But it was too late. Just behind him on the pavement by the waste ground, he heard the familiar voice of old Hetty Morris. "I'm telling you, Sergeant, he's round here somewhere. I'm sure that was him laughing just now." Chapter 13. Ising and Wasing. The bushes round the hollow parted, and there stood Sergeant Hadley from the police station and Miss Morris. Alec froze, mouth open, clutching his greasy supper bag in his hand. He couldn't move or say a word. He was done for. Sergeant Hadley spoke. "Well, there's only this lad here, and you know him." Alec gulped and squinted sideways. Abdul had done his wasn't trick again. His takeaway bag lay on the ground. "Did you see anyone?" the sergeant asked, staring at Alec. Alec opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "That's funny," went on the sergeant. "There's 2 bags here." Alec found his voice. "That's right. It was me mate. He's just gone." That was true anyway. "And nobody else?" Alec shook his head. That was true as well. Miss Morris said nothing. He could see she wasn't pleased. Alec's mother was going to get a full report about him sneaking out for a crafty supper. Sergeant Hadley jerked his thumb. "On your way, lad. Hey, and take your letter with you. If you should see anything suspicious, like a naked black gentleman, just let me know." He looked at Alec, straight-faced. "People are getting alarmed, you know." Alec gathered his bits and pieces and moved off sharpish. 20 minutes later, he was safe in his box room again. For a marvel, no one had seen him come in. They must have been in the front room watching the telly. He sat down on his bed, pulled out the can, and placed it on the chair. "OK, Abdul. Talauna, come forth. You and I must have a serious chat." "Hi, wow, Alec?" "That is the 53rd time today you have nearly caused a disaster. Only my brilliance avoided it. You are a nuisance. No, you're a pain in the can." "I am sorry, oh Alec." "Not only can you not remember spell number 24, or number 99, or number 2056, but you cannot even control yourself. You is and was all over the place, and you don't even know why." "I fear not, O Alec. In the great book, all is made clear." "Then why don't you know?" "I fear that when the Grand Genie taught us, I was always looking out of the window." "Oh," said Alec, "I see what you mean. I can't remember half I learned in school. But that doesn't make me run starkers all over the shop. I mean, can't you even magic yourself a T-shirt and jeans?" "Jeans? Oh, forget it. We've got to work out a way of stopping you ising when you're supposed to wasn't. I mean, if we could get it under control, we might have a bit of fun for a change." A thought struck him. "Hey, we could put a rocket up Barker & Co., couldn't we? They truly wouldn't know what hit 'em." "Rocket, oh Alec?" "A flying carpet in a tight roll." Alec went on to tell Abdul the events of the past 2 days, and the dreads that Barker and his heavies were putting up him. "Aha," said Abdul. "If I could, I would part their heads from their bodies." "Hey, give over, nothing so drastic. Just a little thumping is all they need." "Aha," said Abdul. "Thump." There was, out of nowhere, a sudden crash, and the chair buckled as if hit by a sledgehammer. Alec shook his head. "There's no need to start now, Abdul. Trouble is, until you're programmed right, you're a liability. A genie without magic, not a patch on your dad." There he was, on the chair, one leg crossed modestly over the other. Alec was amazed. "How did that happen? Was it something I did?" Alec tried making various moves and gestures with his hand, but Abdul still sat there. Was it something I said? Wondered Alec. On the other hand, Abdul had ised before now when Alec wasn't talking. Did, said, was it something he'd thought? Alec thought for a while, then gave up. He looked at the window. Outside, the light was fading. "Ah, well, Abdul, I'm ready for me kip. I'm going to get a wash. Your bed's ready on the top of the cupboard. You ought to be really cosy with all those sheets and blankets in there now." Alec wandered out, then came back a minute or two later. The box room was empty. He picked up the can. He could hear Abdul breathing. "Good night, Abdul. We'll have to sort it all out tomorrow. Haven't got long, though, have we? I've not much cash, only about enough for about half a dozen meals. After that, it's bread and water." There was no answer. Was he asleep? "Masalama." That was what old Abu used to say. "Ah!" With a yell, Abdul stood there, rubbing his elbow. "What are you doing, Abdul? Hey, I materialized inside and outside the can at the same time. I feel I have done myself a mischief." "Sorry, Abdul," said Alec. Then it struck him. "That's it, mate. That's the answer. You is when I think about Abu, your dad. That's the answer. Hey, magic. We're going to have fun tomorrow, we are." "As my master wills," said Abdul warily. "Okay," said Alec. "Let's give it a whirly." The thing was, if Abdul ised, when Alec thought about Abu, how could he get him to wasn't? Dead easy. All he had to do was not think about Abu. Just like that. Only it wasn't dead easy. The more Alec tried not to think of Abu, the more the friendly, fatherly face of the third-class genie came into his mind. Abdul stood there, yawning and looking more and more mournful. "Got it," thought Alec. "Think about someone else." He tried. Into his mind came the face of Gary Barker. Yuck. Before he knew where he was, he'd thought of Abu. He tried again and got Miss Morris. He lost her, and back came Abu. Then Spotty Sam, then Abu, then Monty Cartwright, then Abu again. All this time, Abdul was izzing and wazzing like mad, popping in and out of sight like a yo-yo. The young genie's face was a picture of despair. Then Alec had an inspiration. Magic! He thought of Eulalia. Abdul vanished. "Masalama," said Alec. "Masalama," came the reply from the top of the cupboard. 2 minutes later, they were both snoring. In the small hours, while Alec still slept, Abdul was rudely disturbed in his tin-plated boudoir by a long-distance call from old Baghdad. "Awake, for morning in the bowl of night has flung the stone that puts the stars to flight. Abdul, my son, awake." "Oh, my father, why do you wake me in the dark?" "Nonsense, O son. The hunter from the east has caught the Sultan's turret in a noose of light." "Not here he hasn't, Dad." "Dad? Are you impudent, my son?" "Well, sorry, Dad, oh, father, but here it's still night." "Ah, now I remember, O son. The sun has not reached you round the world. It will come in 3 hours. "Am I so far from home, O father?" "Yes, but in our thoughts. The Grand Genie asks if you are learning as you should." "Aye, O father, I am, but not so fast as my master." "How so?" "He has learned how to make me appear and vanish as he wishes. He says that in the morning there will be much to do." "Why are you laughing, O father?" "Nothing, O son. Remember my words. Speak little, hear much, see all. When you return, the Grand Genie will listen with pleasure to your story." "When shall I return, O father?" "In a while. Perhaps 7 years, perhaps 14. Serve well thy master." "Father, he is small and thin and pale of face." "My son, do not despise him for the colour of his skin. He is a human, and humans come in all shapes, sizes, and colours. Now farewell, my son." "When shall I hear thy voice again, O father?" "In a little while. But call me not. I shall call you." Chapter 14. Who's a Crafty Little Man? Alec woke with a feeling of excitement. As soon as he opened his eyes, he remembered. He had Abdul under direct is-was control. He looked at the clock, 7:45. He shook it. Yes, it was going. Then he stretched out under the covers. It was sunny outside, and there was a bird singing. This was the life. Now then, he thought, let's be having you, Abdul. But just then he stopped himself. Must do this properly. "Saida, Abdul, are you awake?" "Yes, O Alec." Alec hopped out of bed, found an old pair of shorts, and laid them out on the chair. "OK, come forth," he called. He waited a few seconds. Mustn't catch Abdul in the exit, must he? Then he thought of Abu. Sure enough, there was Abdul sitting on the chair rubbing his eyes. Alec pointed to the shorts and Abdul struggled into them. He ought really to get Abdul a pair his own size, but the genie was costing him a small fortune in takeaways as it was. "OK, Abdul, let's have a training session." "Must I?" Abdul made a face. "You'd better, mate, if you want any breakfast." Alec began to put Abdul through his paces. At first, Alec fell about laughing, for when Abdul vanished, the shorts stayed there in midair, 3 feet from the ground. "Right, Abdul, get them off." "Must I?" Abdul was offended, but Alec was too full of the new game to pay any attention to that. Abdul removed the pants, and they had a number of practice runs until Alec had the is-was business spot on. Abdul came and went like a dream. Alec looked at his alarm clock. It was 8. "OK, into the can," he told Abdul. He packed can, sports gear and all into his bag. As he walked whistling into the kitchen, Mum and Kim both looked up in surprise from the table. "What's got into Bionic Boy this morning?" demanded his sister. Alec sat down and dug into his breakfast, then answered at his leisure. "It's this wedding, you know. I can't wait. The thought of peace and quiet in the house after all these years. Of course, Archie Blaggett's going to get the rough end, but somebody has to suffer." Kim launched herself at him across the table, but he was ready. He nipped smartly up from his chair, grabbed his bag, and was away out of the house before she could reach him. As he passed the kitchen window, he heard Kim say, "He's growing up too fast for his own good, you know." Mum laughed. "Serves you right, our Kim." Grinning to himself, Alec charged off down the road. For a change, he went into the transport cafe down the main street and bought 2 sandwiches. Beef, he remembered, not pork. Abdul was bound to be a Muslim. Once he was safely out of sight, he called Abdul out and offered him his breakfast. While Abdul ate, Alec thought of how he might use his new powers. Various schemes came into his head, all of which involved Abdul pounding Barker or Spotty Sam, or both. But they all needed careful working out. It had to be done in secret. The powers that be mustn't find out that Bowden had the ultimate deterrent. And he had to do it craftily so that Barker and Co. didn't know what had hit him. Hit being the key word. He'd brood on it a while and wait his chance. Meanwhile, he'd lie low. He went into school discreetly, keeping out of the way of his enemies. But Barker and Spotty Sam didn't even seem to notice him. He passed them in the yard, deep in conversation with Jimmy White from 3F. There was nothing strange in that because Jimmy lived in the same street as Sam. All the same, Barker was up to something, Alec was sure. And if Barker was up to something, that meant trouble. The question was what, and who for? He found out that afternoon. Both forms piled into school coaches and headed across town to the fields. Halfway there, Mr. Hitchin turned in his seat and called to his busload. "Well, lads, a whole afternoon together. Great, eh?" "Muckers," came the polite response. "How about a 10-mile cross-country?" Loud raspberries resounded from the back seats. "I thought you'd like that. But Miss Bentley insists on taking the girls for the last hockey match of the season, so I have reluctantly decided it'll have to be football." "Great! 3H versus 3F, eh?" "Hey, no, sir." Barker spoke up. "I've got a better idea. How about the 2 best players picking their own teams from both forms? Then you get to play with who you want." Spotty Sam and his mates set up a cheer. "Yes, sir." Mr. Hitchin was silent. Alec could feel he had suspicions about Barker's brilliant idea, but he couldn't think of any real objection. "OK, but no funny business." "What, us, sir?" But there was. As soon as the coach loads had changed and Miss Bentley had taken the girls over to the next pitch for hockey, they crowded round Mr. Hitchin. "Right, captains. Jimmy White," yelled Sam. "OK, and Ginger Wallace," shouted one of Jimmy's mates. Mr. Hitchin frowned. But there was nothing wrong with that, was there? Ginger was as good as Jimmy White. If Hitchin said no, what would that mean? He nodded. White picked first. Sam Taylor. Then Ginger. Barry Mackenzie. And so on. Once it was started, Mr. Hitchin knew what the game was, as everyone else did. But it was a bit late now. Once White started, Ginger followed suit. He couldn't leave out any of his mates. The teams lined up, black one side, White on the other. This was going to be a needle match, with Barker and Sam making the running. When number 10 was picked, Alec heard Barker chuckle and say quietly, "Oh dear, they've run out. Have to wait for the next boatload, won't they?" "What was that, Barker?" said Mr. Hitchin sharply. "Nothing, sir." Ginger looked at Barker, then said, "We'll have Bowden." "We'll see. Mascot." "That's enough," called Mr. Hitchin. "Let's get going." As they spread out, Ginger winked at Alec. "You go goalie, Skinny. We'll keep 'em off." He turned back to the centre of the field. The whistle went. The match was on. Chapter 15. Alec nearly holds the fort. The funny thing was, it could have been a good game. The two teams were well matched. Jimmy White and his inside men started with short passing movements, coming down the centre in close formation like a tank. But each time, Ginger broke the moves up and lifted the ball out to his nippy wingers, who came zooming in from left and right to give the other goalie no end of trouble. Alec had the feeling, though, that if Jimmy's men broke through just once, he wouldn't be able to stop them. For Jimmy was a deadly striker, with either foot, and he had a head like a bullet. So Alec hung about on the goal line, jumping up and down to look busy, and hoped that Ginger could hold it together in midfield. And so he did, for the first 10 minutes. Then Ginger's side scored, and the trouble started. It all happened in a matter of seconds. One instant Ginger had the ball, feinted towards the left wing, throwing the opposition on the wrong foot, and then swung round as though he were on bearings and hooked the ball way over to the other wing. The winger crossed the ball right onto Barry Mackenzie's bonce, and it went in so fast that Jimmy's goalie never even heard it scorched by. Ginger's men whooped, jumped on each other like ballet dancers, and yelled at Jimmy's team, "Want another boatload?" Alec, alone in his goal mouth, began to get excited. Maybe we can win this game, he thought. But right then things started to go wild as Barker's mob moved in from either side. As Jimmy and Ginger clashed in the centre, the duel turned into a scrum, and blokes piled in from all angles. Alec heard Ginger bawl, "I'll get you for this, Taylor." Then Mr. Hitchin's whistle blasted. "Wallace, that'll do. The ball, not the man. Play on." There was an outcry, and Ginger's men crowded round Mr. Hitchin, but he waved them off. Alec could see Ginger was getting wound up. There was going to be trouble, which was what Barker had planned from the beginning. And there was. No sooner was the ball in play than the ruck started again. As it fell apart, there were Ginger and Spotty Sam laying into each other, with more lightweight bouts going on nearby. "Any more of this, and you'll all spend the rest of the afternoon running round a field," threatened Mr. Hitchin. But he was talking to the air. Up went the ball. Jimmy's trio forced their way down the centre. Ginger intercepted, and once more the heavy mob moved in from both sides. When the melee cleared, Ginger was rolling around on the ground. Mr. Hitchin ran up. Ginger clambered to his feet, waving everyone off. But as play restarted, he moved more slowly. He was in pain. Someone had duffed his leg up very craftily. 5 minutes later he fell again. Mr. Hitchin looked the leg over and ordered Ginger off. Alec groaned to himself. With Ginger nobbled, anything could happen. And it did. Within 2 minutes, Jimmy White was through on a solo run, coming up in a mad zigzag that left the defence looking 3 ways. Alec crouched and leapt as the ball came in. He got one hand to it and felt as though his fingernails were coming off, but it was in the net and no mistake. "Get another boatload," came the yell from upfield. Gloomily, Alec pulled the ball out and booted it back to the centre. He had the feeling this was only the start, and he was right. Jimmy's men were on the rampage. Ginger's injury left a big, big hole, and soon they were through again. Another 5 minutes and they broke right through. Ginger's men fought back, but they were losing heart. Alec made a couple of saves. One was really great over the crossbar with his fingertips feeling as though they were on fire. The other one he couldn't avoid. It hit him between wind and water and nearly creased him. But Jimmy's men got home twice, and when the whistle went for half-time, they were leading 3-1. This real game was beginning to look like Alec's imaginary Disasters v Triumphs match. Bruised and miserable, he trundled off the pitch behind Ginger's men. He heard one of Barker's mates say, "What they need is a new mascot." That was bad enough, but when one of Ginger's mates said between his teeth to their captain, "Ginge, what do you want to pick that one for?" Ginger looked up from the ground where he was sitting and said, "'Cause he's my mate, so bolt up. You wouldn't have done any better. Give over knocking." That made Alec feel a bit better, but a few seconds later Ginger called to him. "Hey, Skinny, next half we swap round a bit. You'll do better out of goal, eh?" Alec shrugged. He knew what Ginger meant. You'll do less damage out of goal. If only he could play better. If only he could score. He'd show flippin' Barker. Mascot, he'd show... Suddenly he remembered something. He was daft. Why didn't he think of that before? While the others had their backs turned, he nipped over to the changing rooms. Within a minute he was back, holding the old can in his hand as though he was sneaking a crafty drink. Then he set it carefully down by the touchline. The game started again. Jimmy's team were confident and noisy. What they didn't know was that Ginger's team was up to strength again. Chapter 16. Abdul, Superstar. Abdul was not pleased at being turned out of his warm can. "Oh, Alec," he moaned, "it is cold." "Get off," said Alec. "Just a bit of breeze." "Can I have a pair of pants, please?" pleaded Abdul. "You're joking. You've got to stay invisible. And keep your voice down or it's no kebab for you tonight." "What must I do?" "Stick close to me on my right and help me get the ball through the goal over there, okay?" "Okay, or Alec?" The whistle sounded, and right away White's men tore into Ginger's 10 men like a dose of salts. Twice they broke through, but the backs checked them at the last moment. "Why do we stand still while they run?" whispered Abdul. "Just you wait, mate," answered Alec. Right then the ball curved over to bounce in front of Alec. 20 yards away, 3 of Jimmy's men pounded up. "Put it upfield!" yelled Ginger from the touchline. Alec ignored him. He trapped the ball, fumbling it a bit, but just as the players were on him, flicked it to the right. "What are you playing at?" yelled the fullback behind him. Alec didn't listen. As Jimmy's men turned in their rush to get the ball, he dodged behind them. At first they didn't believe what they saw. The ball rolled along, stopped, jerked forward, then suddenly shot away to land right at Alec's feet. Dumbstruck, they watched as he careered down the open centre. From the right, in came Sam Taylor after the man, not the ball, but he got neither. Alec braked as Spotty hurtled up, and then at the last moment, away went the ball to the right. Alec sidestepped, and Spotty Sam went sprawling. "Go on, Skinny!" Ginger's team found their voices again. Now he was right in front of the goal. 2 defenders were moving in to cut him off. The goalie was hopping to and fro a few yards away. Alec stopped the ball and moved to the right. Unable to believe his luck, the goalie threw himself forward. But to his amazement, the ball slipped to the left. Goggle-eyed, he scrambled round to grasp it, but it hopped further away and then slowly, tantalizingly rolled back to Alec's feet. As the defence panted up, it was in the net. "Offside!" they yelled, but Mr. H, though baffled, pointed to the centre. Alec modestly accepted the hugs of his team and trotted back to his position. "How you did that, I don't know," called Ginger, "but do it again." From Alec's right came a whisper. "Shall they not kiss me as well?" "You kinky little devil, Abdul," answered Alec. "Just you do as you're told, and there'll be double a dana for you tonight." This time there was no waiting. As soon as one of Ginger's men got possession, he passed to Alec. Down came the heavy mob, and away whizzed the ball like magic and swung over to Alec, leaving them standing. 10 seconds later, the goalie was picking up the ball, and Ginger's mates were throwing Alec in the air. It was 3-all. "Want another boatload?" they shouted. But Jimmy's men didn't see the joke anymore. Now they were getting desperate. In spite of all their efforts, the ball found its way from all angles back to Alec's feet, and like magic ended up in the back of the net. 4-3 now, and time was running out. In the centre, Jimmy's team clustered round their captain. "How's he doing it?" muttered Sam Taylor. "How do I know? It must be some kind of spin," answered Barker. "Anyway," said Jimmy White, "now you know why Ginger picked him. If I'd known, I'd have got him. I thought he was useless." "Break it up," growled Mr. Hitchin. "This is a match, not a meeting."
"Am I doing as you wish, O Alec?" whispered Abdul. Alec jumped. The flipping genie was breathing down his neck. "Yes, magic. We're winning." "Oh, Alec, it is cold. I beg you to let me have my pants, or go back into the can. I shall die." "Don't talk wet, Abdul. You do as you're told. You'll get a warm-up, a meal, and the kip later on." "But it is shameful to my manhood to stand here naked. Over there are womenfolk." "So, who's worried? They can't see you. Give over." The whistle went. Jimmy's men flung themselves forward to a solid line, short passing, determined at all costs to keep the ball from Alec. But all in vain. Even as they ran, the ball evaded them, rose gracefully in the air, and looped slowly over their heads. "Hey," thought Alec, "that nut of a genie is carrying the ball. Come back here, Abdul. Ta'ala hu'una," he muttered, afraid to speak louder. But Abdul didn't hear him. Or was he ignoring him? Gathering speed, the ball zipped at head height across the field. As each man leapt up to intercept it, he was sent flying. Down they went like skiffles, then back like a boomerang flashed the ball, felling the rest of the team, leaving Jimmy and his men strewn all over the grass. Ginger's lot were helpless with laughter for a few seconds. Then the ball changed course and zoomed in on them, and it was their turn to sprawl this way and that. Alec, the only one left standing, charged after the ball, but it was too late. Like a bat out of hell, it crashed home. Abdul had put one into his own net. It was 4-all. Unable to believe their luck, Jimmy's mob sent up a weak cheer. The goalie ran to put the ball back into midfield, but as he swung at it, the ball hopped to one side and he crashed to the ground. The fullback sprang to it, but as he reached the spot where the ball was, there it wasn't, and he bit the dust. The ball rolled rapidly towards the wings, half Ginger's team in pursuit, yelling. "Abdul, you idiot!" shouted Alec, forgetting himself. But it made no odds. Abdul wasn't listening anymore. He was capering invisibly round the field, this way, that way, drawing both teams into a mad chase. One moment the ball would stop, and as the two groups rushed it, it would sidle away, leaving them floundering on top of one another. In less than a minute, the whole match was a shambles, both sides staggering about, holding on to each other, hysterical with laughter. No one noticed, apart from Alec, that the ball had stopped at the touchline. What was that balmy genie up to now? Alec soon found out. From the middle of the hockey match on the next pitch came yells as a small cyclone hit both teams. The hockey ball shot away to the far side of the field, with both sides frantically chasing it. Amid the bedlam came a cry of pain. Alec suddenly realized. Abdul didn't know you couldn't kick a hockey ball with bare feet. Now the soccer match had come to a standstill while both teams crowded the touchline, cheering as the girls tried to recover control of their game. The ball swung crazily from side to side, 6 feet off the ground. Eulalia sprang in the way of the madly zipping ball and swung her stick in a deadly arc. She missed the ball, but drew a yell of agony from the empty air. "Oh, Christmas," muttered Alec. "Oh, Abu, your poor son's done himself a mischief." As he spoke the words, a great combined shriek and cheer came from the struggling mass of hockey players. Just ahead of them, running for dear life towards the changing rooms, was a naked brown figure. As the teams threw themselves after him, someone shouted, "Hey, it's the Black Panther!" Desperately, Alec tried to put his mind into reverse. Eulalia. He concentrated his mind on the tall black girl as she charged along, skirts flying, hockey stick raised. To his relief, Abdul vanished. Now whistles sounded from both pitches. Mr. Hitchin and Miss Bentley restored order. "All right, let's have you back in the sheds," shouted Mr. H. All 4 teams, now completely mixed together, straggled over to the changing rooms, laughing, shouting and cheering. "For all," shouted Jimmy's men. Ginger's team answered with a, "They got a boatload." A girl's voice rose. "What's the Black Panther got that other men haven't?" And the answer came back, "Well, he hasn't got it any more." As everyone piled back into the changing rooms, all the bad feeling of the early afternoon seemed to have been forgotten. Alec changed swiftly and ran out with his bag onto the field. The can was still there, lying on its side amid the trampled grass. He snatched it up and listened. Nothing. Where was Abdul? He hurried back to the sheds.
Where was that nutty genie? While the others were streaming over to the coaches, he dodged to the back of the buildings. Looking round to make sure no one was watching, Alec set down his bag and spoke quietly but firmly into the mouth of the can. "Salam alaikum, O Abdul. Are you there?" To his relief, the young genie answered, "Alaikum salam, O Alec. Are you okay?" "Bruised, O Alec, but never since I climbed the wall of the caliph's harem have I seen such capers." "Well, you can stop your caper now, mate," said Alec. He began to open his bag to replace the can as he turned towards the coach. But he was no longer alone. Gary Barker, Spotty Sam, and 2 of their mates were behind him. And no one else was in sight. "Right, Bowden," said Barker. "This is it." Chapter 17. It Shouldn't Happen to a Can. Alec tried to make a run for it, but one of the 4 blocked his way, shoving him violently against Sam Taylor. Now they were all round him. Barker, eyes gleaming, shot out a hand at Alec's face. Alec jerked up his bag to guard his eyes. Behind him, a knee went into his back, and he collapsed on the ground, his bag flying away and spilling its contents. The can bounded out and rolled on the concrete pathway alongside the sheds. Spotty Sam aimed a kick at it. It rolled away. He stared, stepped forward, and brought his foot down. But now the can was a yard away from him. "Stop messing about with that," snarled Barker. "Let's get on with it." But Sam wasn't listening. He leapt in the air, both feet together, and came down full force on the can. An expression of pure pain appeared in his face, and his eyes watered as he landed on the concrete. Now the can was by the wall. Sam's mate launched a kick at it, then swore as his foot struck the side of the shed. Now they were all at it, jumping, kicking, stamping like a pack of donkeys while the can waltzed this way and that. Alec craftily gathered his gear together and put it back in his bag. He could sneak off now while the 4 of them went wild in their efforts to smash the can, but he couldn't leave it. Could he dash in and snatch it? No, he'd get his head kicked in. But what would happen to it if he didn't? Dropping his bag, he made a dive, shouldering Barker aside. He had the can in his hand before the others knew what was happening. But as he recovered his balance, so did they. Sam put out a big paw and snatched the can. A grin of glee came over his sweat-smudged mug. Bending down, he held the can on the ground, then carefully placed first one foot and then the other on it, and stood up. With an audible sigh, the can crumpled. A couple of quick stamps from Sam, and it was flattened. Alec felt as though they were doing it to him. Then he knew that was just what they were going to do next, as they gathered round him again. "Get a move on," grunted Barker, drawing back his boot. But the blow never landed. Barker left the ground as if he were jet-propelled, shot to one side, and bounced off the shed wall. Spotty Sam's eyes opened wide in shock. He lurched forward, then stopped. He too rose in the air, then hung a foot off the ground. His mate joined him a second later. Then came a sickening prong as their 2 heads met together, and they slithered down to join Barker on the ground. The 4th tormentor turned his back on the scene of suffering and ran for his life. Alec stood stock still. There was another surprise to come. The squashed can rose into the air. There was a sound of blowing, and with a twang, it filled out to its old shape. "If you will kindly hold this, O Alec," murmured Abdul. Alec took the can and felt it rock slightly. He stowed it away in the bag, keeping one eye warily on Barker and Co., who were struggling to their feet. "You all right, Skinny?" Standing by the corner were Ginger, Barry, and some other lads. "They're all waiting. Hitchin thought you'd bunked off and signed for Liverpool. What's up with Spotty?" "Hey, and Barker! What's been going on?" The damaged trio looked at Ginger's mob, then pushed their way past to the coaches. Alec, Ginger, and the others followed. Mr. Hitchin shouted, "Get a move on, you lot!" Only one bus was left. The others were pulling out of the gate. Mr. Hitchin looked curiously at Sam Taylor as he climbed the coach steps, rubbing his head. "Nasty knock you have there, Taylor? Did that happen in the game?" Sam shook his head and sloped off to the back of the bus. Someone called, "He's been fighting the Black Panther." The coach pulled out. After the excitement of the game, most people were quiet. Ginger eyed Alec once or twice as though he'd like to say something, but changed his mind, grinned, and sat back. After 20 minutes, the coaches rolled into the schoolyard and everyone piled out. Alec felt inside his bag to check the can was okay, then strolled gently to the gate. He passed Barker and Spotty Sam on his way. They looked at him, but said nothing. He had a feeling they would leave him alone for a while. As he turned out of the gate onto School Lane, he heard, "Hey, Skinny!" Eulalia and Ginger caught up with him. Eulalia took his sleeve. "Look, don't your friends deserve an explanation?" "Don't know what you mean." "Oh, but you do," said Ginger. "You never played football like that in all your born days, Skinny. And all this Black Panther lark. What about it?" "Well, that's right out of your old magic can, innit? So why are you keeping it to yourself? Come on, Skinny, tell." Chapter 18. Alec shares a secret. Alec hesitated a moment. Then he felt ashamed. After all, you and Ginge had helped him the other time when he was in trouble with Abu, the original genie. "Okay," he said. "Let's go somewhere quiet." "Our place?" asked Ginger. Alec shook his head. "No, the shelters." They reached the hollow on the waste ground off the junction and sat down on the grass. The bushes screened them from the road. "Come on then, Skinny," urged Eulalia. Alec slowly got out the can and put it down. "Promise you won't tell anyone?" "Come on, Skinny, you know us." She frowned and Alec reddened. "Okay. Abdul's in here." "Abdul, who's he?" "Abu's son." They stared. "You kidding, Skinny?" "No." Ginger nodded. "So all that Black Panther business. It's Abdul, is it? And it was him thumping Spotty this afternoon." Eulalia's eyes shone. "Hey, lots of magic, Skinny." Alec shook his head regretfully. "No, I'm afraid he's—" He was about to say useless, then he realized that wasn't fair. "He's not qualified," he finished lamely. "Hey, no GCSE? That's it." "Well," said Eulalia, "do we get to meet him or don't we?" Alec looked embarrassed. "Come on, Skinny," they demanded. "Oh, all right, but I have to go behind these bushes." "Get away. Just who have you got in there?" "No, but—" Alec hesitated. Then Eulalia remembered and shrieked with laughter. Ginger joined in. "Okay, we won't look, but get a move on." Alec jumped up, got behind the bush, and called out Abdul. "What is it, Alec? I was asleep." "You're always asleep. Look, you're going to meet some friends." "But not— Course not, you clown." Alec got out his shorts and spread them on the grass. Then he concentrated on Abu. At first it didn't work, because he kept thinking of Eulalia sitting on the other side of the bush. But suddenly there was Abdul struggling into his shorts. Alec led him into the hollow and sat down. Abdul remained standing, staring at you and Ginge. "Hey, he's gorgeous, Skinny." Alec said nothing. He'd been afraid Eulalia would say something like that. "Oh, Alec, are these also their slaves?" asked Abdul at last. "Shut up," said Alec. "They'll flatten you if you say that. Sit down, there's a good genie." Abdul sat down slowly, eyeing Eulalia, who gazed back impudently. Then a smile crossed his face. "Aha! You are the maiden with the great staff who struck me." Ginger and you fell about. "Hey, Abdul, man," said Ginger. "No permanent damage, eh?" Abdul looked puzzled a moment, then grinned. "No damage. Much shame, much pain." "Anyway, good to see ya," went on Ginger. "You did a great job today. You may not be an ace genie, but you were magic on that pitch. If we had you on our side every time, we'd crucify 'em." Eulalia said, "Yeah, Abdul, we're going to have fun with you here." She smiled and Abdul grinned back. Alec wished she weren't so enthusiastic. "We still have problems," he said hastily. "Problems?" Alec nodded and told them quickly about Abdul's food, his difficulties over ising and wasing. They nodded. "Tell you what, Skinny, tonight we bring some stuff. You like fried chicken, Abdul?" He nodded and made gentle stomach-patting movements. "And some real clothes, too," added you. "He's not decent in those shorts." They stood up. "Look, we'll get back. Meet you here about 8, eh? When it's darker? Okay, said Alec reluctantly. They moved towards the road. Then Eulalia turned. I just remembered. You can't take Handsome along to Crown Hill like that. He'll have to go back in the can. Alec nodded. He looked carefully at Eulalia. Now she was embarrassed and turned her head away. Abdul had gone. Alec's shorts lay on the grass. Skinny, she gasped. How did you do that? Alec blushed. I'm not telling you. Alec walked slowly home. It had been a fantastic day. It could have been disastrous. Barker and Co could have minced him, but instead they got done. And the football match! He laughed to himself at the memory. With any luck, they could be even more fun. And he was right. What he didn't know was how much fun. And another thing he didn't know was that someone else had become suspicious. Good morning, O son. Good morning, O father. Is my son well? Dad, your son's feeling great. Great? Is my son impudent? Not so, father. The sun shines on the misty tower blocks of Bugletown. The birds sing. Life is good. Whence comes this change? My son, I hope, is not smoking keef. Nothing so childish, O father. I follow your advice. See all, hear much, say little. What hast thou seen, O son? Much, O father. Many things of which the grand genie never spoke. What things, O son? Yesterday, O father, I sported with 22 comely maidens, black, brown, and white. They chased me with great staffs. 22 maidens? What mischief is this? I fear my son is returning to his old ways. Me, O father? You must have some other genie in mind. But listen, I met the friends of Alec. Ah, the boy Ginger. Indeed, father, and the maid Eulalia. She clothed me in fine raiment and served me chicken upon a golden dish. A golden dish? Well, a plastic plate. Oh, father, such beauty! Oh, Mumtaz, Quaisowi, oh. Control thyself, my son. Did I not warn you to beware of women? Have no fear, O father. And here, yesterday I smote the enemies of Alec. Who? The sharp-tongued Harris and the pompous Blaggett? I know them not, O father. You will meet them, my son. They are great in the land and work much mischief. Fear not, I shall destroy them all. How will you do so, O son, if you cannot remember your spells? Perhaps my memory will return, O father. Perhaps, my son. And if it does, remember the punishments that await the disobedient. I hear, O father. Farewell, O father. Farewell, my son, and take heed. Chapter 19. Abdul warms up. Alec woke early. Too early. It was the dawn chorus that did it. Not the birds singing, but someone else. As he slowly poked his head out of the bedclothes, he heard Abdul chanting away. He couldn't see him, but that pair of bright red dungarees you had given the young genie the night before was sitting upright on the chair by the bed. That meant Abdul had to be inside them. Just to test the theory, Alec gave Abu a quick think. Sure enough, there sat Abdul looking smart, face shining with goodwill, mouth wide open as he sang. Abdul, what's all that row about? I am singing. Well, put a sock in it. I have no sock. Well, just belt up then. I have no belt. Abdul, are you doing this on purpose? No, O Alec. Well, be quiet. Offended, Abdul closed his mouth and looked straight ahead. What were you singing anyway? Asked Alec. Abdul gave no answer. Where's your tongue? Cat got it? You said to be quiet, O Alec. Oh, never mind. What were you singing? A beautiful song. That's your story. What was it? Abdul took a deep breath and began again. No, translate, please. Abdul took another breath. Today a beauteous maiden I shall see. Delicious dishes will she give to me. A delicious dish is she. All right, Abdul, that's enough. The tune's terrible. The English isn't much better. My English is better than your Arabic, said Abdul. Alec stared. You what? Oh, okay, Abdul, you win that one. Alec looked at the clock. Look, if we're meeting Ginger and Eulalia for breakfast, we have to get a move on. Into the can with you. Alec concentrated on Eulalia a moment. Abdul vanished, and Alec began to get his gear and himself together for school. It was a great day, fine and warm, with clear blue skies. When Alec reached the hollow on the waste ground, Eulalia and Ginger were waiting with food for Abdul. "You look really smart, Abby," said Ginger. His sister looked admiringly at the genie, who grinned back, and to Alec's great annoyance, began to play up. He polished off his food, carefully wiped his fingers on the grass, and then, taking up Eulalia's hand, began to recite. "Ah, with a loaf of bread beneath the bough, a jug of wine, a book of verse, and thou—" "Hey, did you just make that up?" asked Eulalia, smartly taking her hand back. "Beside me singing—" "Give over, Abdul, stop showing off," snapped Alec. "In the wilderness," said Abdul, reaching for Eulalia's hand again. Right, thought Alec. He vanished Abdul right in mid-verse, leaving the dungarees sitting there, while Ginger and Eulalia stared open-mouthed. "Okay, into the can," ordered Alec. The dungarees slowly collapsed and folded to the ground. "Hey, that was a bit short, Skinny. It was only funning," said Eulalia. Alec stuffed the can back in the bag. "Come on, we're late," he said, and jumped to his feet. Suddenly he was in a bad mood. This flippin' genie was going to be a bit of a menace if he went on like that. He was right. The first sign came during maths, when Alec looked down to get his protractor out and found his bag was wide open. That was funny. He always made sure it was shut when he had to lug his gear from room to room. But the bag was open and the can stood on its end by the side of Abdul's folded clothes. Something was going on. Indeed it was. 5 minutes later, there was a tremendous slap. Ronnie Carter sent up a yelp of pain and glared at Alice Rogers. Miss Fortis looked up in astonishment. "Whatever was that for, Alice?" Alice was silent a moment, then burst out, "Ronnie Carter pinched me bum, miss." "I never—" Ronnie choked with indignation. Miss Fortis looked at him. "Well, Ronnie, I know you're a growing boy, but I wouldn't have thought that was your style. Are you sure, Alice? You didn't catch yourself on something?" Alice glared round. "I know when somebody's pinched me." Alec turned round. He could see Eulalia grinning to herself. Was she thinking what he was thinking? He looked down. The bag was closed now, and the straps fastened. The rest of the morning was quiet, to Alec's relief. But there was more to come. As they came back into the room after lunch, Gary Barker made a great parade of sniffing the air with disgusted noises. "This place smells like a Turkish chippy," he said. Alec ignored him and walked past to his desk. But the smell was there all right, a rich, appetizing, kebabby smell. And he traced it without difficulty to his own bag. But the bag lay where it had been and the straps were fastened. First period was science in the lab. Alec debated with himself whether he should take his bag or not. He didn't exactly know what was going on, but he decided he'd better have that can within reach. He took the bag with him, but just as a precaution, he borrowed some string from Mr. Hitchin and tied it tightly round the buckles. Halfway through the lesson, with the class gathered round the benches in the laboratory, Spotty Sam suddenly gave a roar of rage and wiped his face. "Funny man, eh?" He snatched up a pipette, sucked up water from the flask in front of him, and squirted the lad across the bench full in the eye. "You're off your trolley, Spotty. I didn't do anything," yelled his victim. "Not much you didn't, you creep!" Sam started round the bench, but halfway there met Mr. Jameson, who had homed in on the noise from the far end of the lab. "Taylor, you know the rules. No, but no messing about with equipment. Outside, and there'll be detention for you." Sam was indignant. "You wait," he muttered. At his side, Gary Barker sniggered and whispered, "I'd emigrate if I were you, mate." Alec looked down. His bag was closed and the string still secure round the buckles. Somebody was making a monkey out of somebody else today. Things were quieter for an hour or so. They reached the last period, history, without any more malarkey. As the time crept round towards 3:30, Alec began to think the day might end without any disasters involving him. When he got home, he'd have to have a sort out with son of Abu, and no mistake. There was a commotion behind him, and Tweedy Harris turned from the board where he'd been chalking up some gem of knowledge about ancient Rome and said, "You boy, get back in your seat." Without even looking round, Alec knew what had happened. Abdul, materialized, was crouching behind him. He squinted over his shoulder and tried to think of Eulalia. But before he could even get his thoughts into gear, Abdul had gone again. Beneath the seat, Alec's bag hung open. He bent down, buckled it up, and faced ahead, hoping Tweedy hadn't connected the disturbance with him. Some hopes. Tweedy went back to his desk and got back into his stride. Ancient Rome, like ancient Greece, was based upon slavery. Some modern historians seem to think this was a bad thing, as if things could have been better if everyone had the vote, as in our own unfortunate times. He paused. Can you imagine? Alec knew one of Tweedy's so-called funnies was coming. Can you imagine? Vote for Nero. Non-stop violin concerts and central heating for all. Oh, no. It was terrible, but some people were laughing. Tweedy warmed up. He was a sarcastic individual, and he loved to play to the gallery. No, slavery is a much misunderstood business. Of course, in these days, it's fashionable to run down everything in the past, so we hear a great deal about the horrors of being a slave. But one imagines the great majority of slaves quite liked their way of life. At all events, they didn't suffer too much. Father of lies! Tweedy stopped in his tracks, mouth open. What was that? Father of lies! Oh, infidel pig! How can you know what it is like to be a slave? Tweedy bounded to his feet and stepped from his table. Behind his glasses, his eyes gleamed like searchlights. Which individual is it that knows more on this subject than I? Someone over on that side, I think. He turned to the window where Ginger and Eulalia sat. They were dumbstruck. Well? Asked Tweedy. His answer came swiftly. A good teacher speaks from wisdom, not from pride. His pupils look to him to speak truth, not to tell lies in his own conceit. Tweedy moved in long strides, pausing in front of Eulalia. Someone around here, I think. But the voice was not that of a lady, nor was the behaviour. Lay but one finger upon the lovely maiden, and your face shall forever look backwards upon your shoulders. At these last words, which finally sent the shocked class into a burst of nervous laughter, Tweedy arrived in front of Alec. That leaves us only with Bowden. Yes, Bowden, I think. I seem to remember you have ambitions to be a historian. Well, you may continue your studies in detention today and tomorrow. Chapter 20. Super Nosh. Alec charged up the stairs, struggled into the box room, hurled his school bag on the bed, shooting books, geometry set, dungarees and can in all directions, and giving Abu a swift think at the same time. With a crash, Abdul materialized, doubled up against the cupboard, and sat gawping up at Alec. Was there something, oh Alec? Too right there was something, you gormless genie, you brainless banshee, you necromancing nutjob, you... Words failed him. Abdul put on a hurt but dignified look as he reached for his clothes. I do not understand. All day I have laboured to please you, to amuse your friends and confound your enemies. But behold, you are displeased. Displeased? Displeased? Alec's voice went up an octave. I'm livid, I'm furious, I'm fuming, I'm wild, I'm rabid. Don't you realise what you've done today? Abdul gravely shook his head. For a start, what was all that bum-pinching for? That was to bring trouble on the head of the small and wicked Bakar. Well, you Burke, you missed. It was Ronnie Carter who copped it. He's no friend of mine, but he's no enemy. But some of the spots, was he not punished? In spite of himself, Alec grinned. That's true. Still, you couldn't miss Spotty. Then his grin vanished as he remembered. Yeah, but Spotty wasn't the only one who got lumbered, was he? Abdul's face was blank. Alec wished he could read his thoughts. You did well with Tweedy Harris, didn't you? He demanded. Abdul gave a fat smile at the memory. Ah, a sharp-tongued Harris. Aye. Had I spoken so to the Grand Genie, he would have chained me to a rock for 2,000 years. Yes, and as it happened, Tweedy chained me to a rock for 2,000 hours tonight." Alec stared at Abdul's baffled face. "You were safe in your capsule, weren't you? And I was kept in at school. But Alec, he thought it was me insulting him, not you, didn't he?" Abdul's handsome face lit up with a smile, then a broad grin, then a great laugh. Alec ground his teeth and found he was grinning himself. "Hey, look, I've got another bone to pick with you," he added quickly. Abdul stopped laughing. "You've been making a monkey of me, haven't you?" "Aye? Pretending you couldn't remember spells? Well, I don't believe you. All that caper today, you must have remembered some magic." For a moment it seemed Abdul would deny it, then he smiled. "True, O Alec. All the great excitement of yesterday did bring back to my mind a small spell or two. Right. From now on, you work for your supper. I've only got £5.60 left out of my birthday money, so you can get busy and—" Alec paused. He suddenly remembered the time he'd asked old Abu to make money for him, and the genie had given him a bag of old Arabian coins. Yes, and he tried to be smart and flogged them to Archie Blaggett, and they'd turned into milk tokens, and Archie had nearly decapitated him. No, money would need a little more careful thought. He'd go straight for the real stuff instead. "Right, let's have a meal, Abdul. I know you can do that. That's got to be the first thing that every genie learns in infant school." Abdul looked doubtful. Or was he looking crafty? "Come on," said Alec, getting impatient. "Let's have a kebab." "Kebab? Don't tell me you can't understand that." Abdul frowned. He looked genuinely puzzled. Alec rummaged in his bag and pulled out a sheet of paper and a pencil. "Look, Abdul, don't be so slow. Meat, sheep, mutton. Here." He drew a quick sketch of a small lamb leaping about on a field. "Ah," said Abdul. He raised his arm, snapped his fingers, and to Alec's utter astonishment, a small dog, half terrier, half dachshund, low, long and woolly, with a fiercely wagging tail, appeared just inside the door. It leapt up and landed on Alec's lap, gave him a swift lick on the nose, then leapt down again, took 2 quick paces to the chair, sniffed at it, lifted its hind leg. "Abdul!" yelled Alec. "Knock it off! Vanish it! Get rid of it!" Abdul snapped his fingers. But the spell seemed to work slowly, and a few small drops of moisture remained on the mat beneath the chair to show where the dog had been. It was a smashing little dog, thought Alec. Pity it had to go, but you couldn't have pets in council houses, worse luck, and Mum would never let him have it in the box room anyway, would she? "Abdul, try again. Not dog, sheep." Right in front of him, jammed between the bed and the wall, was a fierce-looking ram with curly horns and a thick, smelly wool body-warmer. "Abdul, get it out of here! You'll have Mum come in!" It vanished. Just then, Alec noticed the gleam in Abdul's eye. "Right, mate, joke over. Now let's be having you. I want a real meal. Let's have some obedience." Abdul was serious. "What is thy will? Shish kebab, doner kebab, eat here or take away?" Alec shook his head. "Not much. Nothing so common. First, I want a white tablecloth, then silver plates, then crystal goblets, then I'll have nazim tofa, eggs in wine sauce for starters, tola shobasi, soup of paradise to follow, uskumna pilaxi, baked mackerel, followed by kirasili sulon, pheasant with cherries for main course. Oh, and sutlak sharapli, rice pudding with wine for afters." Abdul gazed at him in silence. At last he spoke with respect. "Well chosen, O master. But it will take time." "That's okay, Abdul. Take your time, mate, but get a move on." He lay on his bed. The delicious smells began to fill the room. Pity about the dog, he thought. It was only a small one. Pity he couldn't have kept it. "Awake, my son. Saida. Saida, O father. You have been making magic, my son." "Hey, how did you guess, Dad? Sorry, O father." "You were unable to wake up at first, a sure sign that a genie has been hard at work. What have you done?" "I made a feast for Alec. He chose—" "I know what he chose, my son. I taught him the delights of Baghdad cuisine myself. And what other spells did you work?" "I brought confusion on his enemies." "Ah, Sam of the Spots and the sharp-tongued Harris. Did you punish them mightily?" "Well, yes and no, O father.
What is this?
It is a little hard to explain. Tell me, my son. It was Alec who was punished in the end.
Ah, my son. Now you have truly learned the first lesson of a genie. To satisfy the wishes of humans often leads to trouble.
But these were only small spells, O father.
Is it not written, my son, that it is easier to build a palace for a sultan than to make a good small house for all his subjects?
If you say so, Dad, O father. But, father, I would ask a question.
Ask, O son.
Why, if we have such magic powers and humans do not, why must we be their slaves?
The servant is often cleverer than a master, O son.
But I have heard today that in ancient times slaves rose up and punished their masters.
So it was, O son, for humans will not willingly be slaves.
Then why should we be slaves to humans?
When you have worked well and learned much, when you have returned and taken the great oath of obedience, all will be explained.
But, father—
Ma salama, my son. Say little, hear much, see all.
Chapter 21. A Dog So Small. Alec decided that today he had to be masterful. It was make or break for him. He made up his mind as soon as he opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was Abdul sitting on the chair by the window. Alec didn't even get a chance to use that chair these days. He had on the red dungarees Ginger New had given him, but he also had on a blue spotted scarf. Alec had to admit he looked smart in it. And Abdul was singing, "Today a delicious maiden I shall see." That did it. Alec leapt out of bed, clapped his hands and said, "Right, Abdul, new routine today. I want a quiet time at school, so you'll stay at home." The smile vanished from the genie's face.
"But don't but me. You can make yourself a nice meal, but vanish if Mum comes up here."
"But what shall I do, Alec?"
"Do, mate. You can study, that's what you can do. Have a look at those books, magazines and comics in my cupboard. Find a bit out about life, and," he smiled to himself, "we'll have a nosh-up when I come home, and I'll test you on what you've learnt." Abdul started to protest, but Alec silenced him with, "Say little, hear much, see all." And with that he slid downstairs where his breakfast was ready. Mum and Kim took no notice of him. They were arguing about, guess what, the wedding. He left them to it and rolled off down the road. He was so busy planning for the future that he didn't even notice the great pong as he went over the canal bridge, which was something, because each day as the weather got warmer, so did the pong. But Alec was thinking, now that Abdul had begun to remember his spells, they could go places. First of all, though, he had to get Abdul programmed right, to make sure he did what he was supposed to. Another day like yesterday, and Alec would be ready to be taken off by little men in white coats. But a day at home should be enough to straighten out Abdul. It was while he was legging along the main road that he first noticed the little dog. It was inspecting a lamp-post as he went past, and he thought it looked familiar. He went past and thought no more of it. But 5 minutes later, as he crossed the entrance to a side street, Alec noticed the dog was following him, about 5 yards behind. He stopped. Sure enough, the animal came right up to him, wagging that long lamb's tail, and climbed up his leg, snuffling away. It was the same dog, half dachshund, half terrier, low, long and nippy, with short, fat, hairy little legs. "Hey, get off," he said, suddenly alarmed. "Go home." No, not home, that wouldn't do. "Get away," he commanded, gesturing down the street. The dog wagged its tail, but still followed him. "Get off," he said again more forcefully. The dog stood on its 2 back legs and did a small dance, as if he'd said, "Walkies," and carried on following him. Alec had an idea. He stood over the dog. "Sit," he commanded. It sat. Great. "Stay." It stayed. Greater. Alec set off at a run, but a few seconds later, from behind him, came a pathetic sound, half howl, half whimper. Alec ignored it and pressed on. The sound got louder. Now an old lady stood in his path. "Is that your dog, young man?" No." "Well, you were playing with him just now. You can't just leave him. That's how dogs get run over when their owners don't look after them."
While they stood there, the little swine came sidling up, tail going like a two-stroke piston, and jumped up on Alec. "There you are, poor little dog." She bent over it, and the dog rolled on its back, legs in the air, to be scratched. "Why, he's a lovely little thing. Fancy wanting to abandon a sweet little—" Alec escaped, the dog at his heels. But when he arrived at the waste ground, there was no sign of Ginger and Eulalia. He realized he must be late. He turned at full speed for School Lane, the dog racing, leaping, and woofing at his side. As they reached the gate, the duty teacher called, "That'll do, Bowden. Don't bring that dog into school. You know better than that." Alec turned in desperation to the dog. "Go and get lost. Have a walk. Go for a swim or something." To his relief, the dog disappeared. He caught the end of line-up and was able to explain quickly to Eulalia that Abdul was resting. She looked puzzled but said nothing, and the day began as usual. It was English, and Miss Welsh was taking them through a set book of poems. Alec was soon bored out of his skull, and the time passed dreamily away till break. It was after break, in the middle of geography, that Alec was aware that something was going on. People were whispering and pointing. He looked across to the glass door which opened out onto the fire escape. Outside, sitting pathetically on its haunches, fur dripping wet and flattened, was the dog. The geography teacher called to the lad nearest the door. "Go and get rid of that hound, will you? Otherwise we'll get no work done here today." But no sooner was the door opened than the dog easily dodged his appointed keeper and rambled into the room, shaking drops of muddy water everywhere as he went. A foul smell spread through the room. The geography teacher turned pale. "He must have been in the canal, sir," suggested someone. "I don't care where he's been. It's where he's going that matters. Taylor, you're big enough. Get him out of here." Spotty Sam rose and lunged at the dog, who quickly scampered down the gangway, dodged a couple of outstretched hands, hesitated at the top of the next row, looked this way and that, cocked his leg against the teacher's table, and then, like a homing pigeon, made its way to Alec, where it greeted him with a loving lick and smeared him with eau de cannelle at the same time. "So it's yours, is it, Bowden? You know you don't bring pets into school." No use to deny it. Alec got up and walked out of the room, the dog trotting obediently behind him. One swift leg up by the door, and they were out in the passage. He bent over the dog. He had a sudden inspiration. "Imshi, home to Abdul." The dog simply vanished. Alec went back into class. He saw no more of the hound that day, and began to think he might get through the rest of school without too much disaster. To keep out of the way, at lunchtime he chose a quiet corner of the yard and made a meal out of a tasty bit of chapati and Borsa sausage he'd saved from last night's feast. That seemed a good idea at the time, but later that afternoon he began to have his doubts. In fact, the combined effects of the lunch and last night's rich meal began to catch up on him. 10 minutes before the bell went, he put his hand up. Mr. Foster looked at him quizzically. "I know I'm an innocent, Alec, but even I'm aware that nature's call at this time of day is very suspicious." Alec felt a shooting pain inside and gasped, "Honest, sir, I have to go." Mr. Foster looked at him sympathetically. "I suppose it would be disastrous if I were mistaken. Off you go, but report back to me afterwards." Alec rushed across the yard and to the lavs, and 5 minutes later he was comfortable again. He was just ready to go back when he stopped. He heard footsteps in the passage outside, murmuring voices. Then the click of a lighter and the smell of smoke reached him. He'd better sit tight. If this was a bunch of fourth years having a crafty smoke, he'd be as welcome as flowers in May. But it wasn't. It was someone else. When he heard the voices, he sat even tighter. For the third time today, he began to regret having put Abdul under house arrest. He didn't dare move. Chapter 22. Who's a Horrible Little Man? Gary Barker spoke. "Come in Sunday?" Sam Taylor answered. "Where?" "Some of us are going down Bowen Street. Tidy it up a bit." "Get off. What about the law?" "Don't be stupid. My mate's brother's a painter. He'll do us some posters. We'll have a march." "March?" Sam sounded disgusted. "Yeah. You've got sawdust up there, Sam. You know, keep Bugletown clean, Black Panthers out, stuff like that." "You're off your runners, Gary. I'm not coming on any march. Your family's nuts about demos and all. Listen, Sam, if we go down Bowen Street, Wallace's mob are bound to come out, aren't they? Wallace reckons no one comes down there without his permission, doesn't he? So we take 'em. And then the law takes us. Never. We're on a demo, against mugging, law and order, so we get a police escort." "Listen, they'll love it. Have you seen the local rag? It's got letters in about this Black Panther caper. There's one from my dad. Come on, this time we fix Wallace and he stays fixed. When we have enough, we pass the word round there's going to be a bundle. We'll have enough, don't worry. Course, if you're chicken, Sam. Stuff that, Gary. Fair enough then, come on." The footsteps died away. Alec slowly washed his hands and slid out of the lavs. The yard outside was empty now. He nipped across to school and saw Mr. Foster, who grinned and hoped he'd be better tomorrow. Alec set off at a run. His first port of call was Bowen Street. He hammered on the front door of Ginger's home, but no one answered. Mrs. Wallace must still be out at work. You and Ginger could be anywhere. Ah, well, he'd come down again later and try to catch them in. He ought to warn the Wallaces so they could tell their friends. Then as he walked home slowly, he wondered what else he should do. Should he tell the police that this little poster parade was not what it claimed to be? It was just an excuse for starting a street fight? They'd have to stop it then. On the other hand, he didn't like the idea of going to the police. Anyway, what would he say? "While I was sitting on the lav at school, I heard this conversation." No, that wouldn't work. Maybe he should have a word with Dad about it. But this week Dad was on late and he'd be gone already. And tomorrow was the big day at home. Nobody would thank him for stirring things up when Kim was having her party. He'd have to think about it. But he must let the Wallaces know that was the least he could do. Hey, maybe Abdul could think of some way of fixing Barker and Co. Or was that a good idea? Let's face it, Abdul's capers did the opposite to what they were supposed to do, like his dad's. The difference was that with old Abu, it was accidental. With this nut of a son, it was on purpose. Still, he had to do something. As he entered the kitchen at home, Mum and Kim were there, busy as usual, checking the grub for tomorrow. Every table and cupboard top was crammed with plates and dishes, all covered in plastic and foil, and Mum and Kim stood by the window, counting on their fingers and contradicting each other as usual. They took no notice of him, as usual. Mum suddenly stopped in mid-argument and said, "Kim, love, we've forgotten the drinks." Kim made a face. "I'm not all that keen on having too much, Mum. It costs the earth. Your dad and I are paying. Don't I know it, Mum? But I'm not keen. There's some I won't name, but if they get a drop too much, everything goes out of the window." "Oh, come on, Kim, it's only once." "Once could be once too often. Look, Mum, honestly, Archie and me persuaded his dad to come. He didn't want to. I'm really sorry for him, Kim. He must suffer. Stop being sarky, Mum. He knows what this family thinks of him. He's quarrelled with our dad, or Dad quarrelled with him. That was Mr. Braggett's fault, Kim. That's his maybe. And his dad used to row with Grandad. And I'm not having anybody having a go at him while he's a guest at my engagement party, and that's that. But your dad never... Oh, Mum, you know I'm not talking about our dad." "Oh, it's Grandad, then. Well, that's not very nice, our Kim. It may not be, but I'm not having him reciting his so-called funny poems and monologues. Not when he's had a drop too. Look, Kim, love, if it's any comfort, I'll see that Grandad has a bottle of stout or something like that, and no more. Will that satisfy you?" "All right, Mum." Mum turned round suddenly. "Alec, what are you making big ears for? You're late. Look, I'll put your tea in your room. You can get up there now and get all your weekend homework done." "Oh, get off, Mum. I've got to get out this evening." "Got to? What kind of talk's that, Alec?" "Oh, Mum, I can do my homework tomorrow." "No, you can't, Alec. There's the party." "It's not all day, Mum." "I know, lad." His mother hesitated. "We shall need your room for putting things in while we tidy down here for the party." "Flippin' heck, Mum. First I get kicked out of my own room into the box room, then you kick me out of there. She smiled at him and ruffled his hair. Come on, lad, it won't be for long. Then after August, you get your own room back, when Grandad moves into Kim's room. Alec shrugged. He slouched out of the kitchen and upstairs. Not go out? Of course he was going out. He had to go out this evening, one way or another. The question was how. He pushed his way into the box room, made to throw his bag onto the bed, and stopped short in surprise. Lying there, feet up on the rail, was Abdul, reading one of Alec's old Marvel comics. But what sort of Abdul was this? Gone were the red dungarees. Instead, there was a sleek suit in a kind of mauvey grey, with high shoulders and trouser turn-ups that looked about 3 feet wide, and snakeskin shoes. On his fingers were massive stone-studded rings, and over the top of the comic, Abdul's eyes regarded him from behind enormous black glasses. "Alec, man, that's cool," he greeted him. Alec hooted. "Say, what gives, brother?" Alec choked back his laughter. "Listen, you old-fashioned genie cat, we have trouble." "What's the word?" Abdul removed the black glasses. Alec told him quickly. The genie, now looking serious, swung his legs down from the bed. "Trouble is, Abdul, I can't get out." Abdul grinned. "Hang loose, man. Wait till dark." Chapter 23. Abdul Takes Off. Mystified, Alec watched while Abdul bent down, jerked the mat from under the bedside chair, and held it up. He nodded as though satisfied, then shook his head and laid the carpet down again. Snapping his fingers, he commanded, "String, brother." Alec stepped quickly to his cupboard and fished out a piece of string from one of the drawers. Abdul swiftly folded over 2 corners of the mat to make a triangular shape, made a noose of the string and slipped it over the point. "Concord," he said briefly. Jerking his thumb at the bed, he remarked pleasantly, "Park your butt, Alec." Alec parked his butt, and still baffled, waited for an explanation. But the new, masterful Abdul was not giving any. Pushing his dark glasses back on his nose, he picked up his comic and resumed his reading. Alec shrugged, and finding himself a spare corner of the bed, began to do his homework. There wasn't much room, and Abdul took up quite a bit of it. Now and then he began to wonder whether it was worth it after all. Having a private genie. It was true that Abu, the old-style genie, was awkward now and then, but he stayed invisible most of the time, and he did what he was told. But the new model Abdul just ised and wased as it suited him, and generally took charge. Maybe, he reflected, he should have been a bit more thoughtful at the start. Maybe he shouldn't have kept Abdul hanging about Starkers on the football pitch that day. On the other hand, Abdul was a genie, new style. Alec couldn't puzzle it out, so he went on with his homework. That seemed easier than his other problems. Abdul looked up. It was growing dark outside. He snapped his fingers. "Let's get airborne," he grunted. Airborne? Alec goggled as the mat with its triangular end slowly rose from the floor and rested 3 feet up. "Open all ports," sang out Abdul. Then, seeing Alec's vacant look, he added, shaking his head, "The window, Alec." Alec climbed on the bed and opened the window. He didn't see much point. It was only about 6 inches square anyway. "Embark. Get on board, Alec." Alec scrambled onto the back of the mat. Abdul had already perched himself at the sharp end. He'd put away his dark glasses and had a pair of goggles on. "Do we have lift off?" asked Abdul. Alec gulped. "We have. Lift off." The mat tilted. Alec grabbed wildly at Abdul's coat to steady himself, and the craft headed for the window. "Hey, Abdul, there's no way out there," he said nervously. "Way out, man? Far out, laid back, drop out, hang up, hang tight, hang loose, wind up, put down, switch on," chanted Abdul as the mat suddenly shot clean through the small space and out into the twilight air. Just as soon as they cleared the house, the craft dropped with sickening force. "Oh no," thought Alec. "I have to go on a flying mat with a genie who hasn't passed his test." They hurtled towards the backyard, and Alec gritted his teeth until sparks came. Then, Just as they were about to force land in the dustbin, Abdul swung the mat up in an almost vertical climb. He looked round at Alec's white face. "Just clearing the cylinders," he grinned. He took the mat swiftly up a couple of 100 feet and swept out across the allotments. They swooped over the tank. The ruined buildings inside their high fence stood out more blackly in the growing dusk. "What's that place? An old castle?" asked Abdul. "No," answered Alec. Very quickly he told Abdul how Abu, his dad, had hidden down there when Councillor Blaggett and the police were after him as an illegal immigrant. "Man, you people have it in for genies," said Abdul. "Only when they're visible," answered Alec. "Love the magic, love the man," sang out Abdul and banked sharply. Now they were flying along the course of the canal. Even at this height, the stench from the muddy rubbish-block waters beneath them rose up to hit the nose. "Oh," snorted Abdul. "I reckon the best would be to drop old man Blaggett in there again. Then maybe he'd clean it up." Alec laughed. "You wouldn't get him near enough." The mat swung again and zoomed low over the main road. There were few people about, but from the three fiddlers there came the sound of shouting and singing. On the corner nearby were 3 policemen. Alec recognized Sergeant Hadley. Abdul had spotted them too. Before Alec even knew what he was about, he sent the craft into a low, scorching dive that took in the trio at head height. They never knew what hit them as their helmets went bouncing over the pavement. "Abdul, you crazy!" shouted Alec, but they were away over the pub roof and zooming over School Lane. Bonus Street was just ahead now, and Abdul steadied the mat before putting it into a long and graceful approach swoop. They came down the street at roof height, slowly losing speed. Number 85 had lights on, both upstairs and down. Suddenly the mat stopped, and Alec was thrown forward against the pilot's back with such force that his teeth rattled. They were hovering now, like a chopper, about a yard away from the Wallace's bedroom window. With a wide grin, Abdul pointed in. The room was small, but had 2 beds in it. In one of them, a girl was fast asleep. On the other, combing her hair in front of a mirror, was Eulalia. Alec was suddenly embarrassed to be spying on her like this, but to his horror, Abdul now produced out of nowhere a shiny steel and mother-of-pearl decorated banjo, struck up a strumming chord, and began to sing. "Oh, my Eulalia, you's lovelier than a dahlia, Eulalia, don't think me a failure. Honey child, honey lamb, you's as sweet as strawberry jam, Eulalia, I would fly to Australia." "You clown!" yelled Alec, snatching at the banjo to stop the racket which seemed to fill the street. Abdul turned calmly. "Passengers do not get to mess with the pilot. Off!" "Off? You're crazy! I'll break my neck!" Abdul dropped the mat with a crunch to the pavement below the Wallace's steps. Alec was tipped off. With a whisk, the mat shot up again. While Alec watched, it hovered a second or two, then Abdul, banjo and all, vanished. As Alec stared, a black shape hurtled at him. Before he could dodge, the mat draped itself over his head. Furious, he was just struggling free from the folds of the mat when he heard voices behind him. "And what are you up to, lad?" He looked up in horror. 2 helmetless policemen looked down at him. Chapter 24. This way for the nick. Alec stammered. "I'm calling for me friend." "Oh, yes," said one of the policemen. "Bringing your own floor covering as well, eh?" "It is my own. It's out of my bedroom." "Oh, yes. And do your parents know you're carting their gear round the town to your mates, eh?" Alec didn't know what to say to that one. If his parents found out, how could he explain it? "You better come with us." A large hand gripped Alec's arm. "Just a moment. Might I ask where you might be taking that boy?" In front of them on the pavement, massively blocking the way, was Ginger's dad, Mr. Wallace, still in his railway overalls, his rolled-up orange plastic jacket sticking out of his pocket. The policeman eyed him a second without answering. Mr. Wallace looked at them and waited. "If you must know, we're taking him along to find out where he acquired this mat." "What does he say?" asked Mr. Wallace slowly. "He reckons he's visiting his friends." "That's true." "He's a friend of my son and daughter. His name's Bowden. His father works on the railway. You ought to know the family." They looked uncomfortable, partly because they had to look up when they talked to Mr. Wallace. The grip was removed from Alec's arm. "He could have told us that. He was very evasive." "Maybe it's the way you talk to him. You put the wind up him. Come on, Alec. Come on in." Mr. Wallace stepped round the law and climbed the stone steps to the front door. He turned. "Good night, then?" "Good night." The policeman strolled away. Alec quietly lowered his mat to the ground at the side of the steps and followed Mr. Wallace in. From the kitchen at the end of the passage came the smell of cooking and the sound of singing. Mr. Wallace nodded Alec into the tiny front room. A second later, in came Ginger. "Hey, Skinny, what you doing, mate? I hear Pa bailed you out." Alec nodded. He was just about to explain how he came to be in that daft situation when Mrs. Wallace came in. "Hello, Alec, love. You having supper with us?" Alec shook his head, embarrassed. "Cup of tea, then? Coke? Ginger, go and get Alec a Coke, and quick." Mrs. Wallace went out again, and Alec could hear her talking to her husband in the kitchen. Ginger came back with the Coke and slung himself down on the settee, feet over the end. "Hey, you look funny. What's up?" Alec told Ginger all that had happened. When Ginger heard about Gary Barker's Sunday outing, he struck his fist into his palm. "They come down Berners Street. We'll give 'em a demo." He broke off and hastily jerked his feet from the end of the sofa as his parents came in. "Who's coming down Berners Street, Byron?" asked Mrs. Wallace suspiciously. Ginger looked embarrassed, but whether it was for having his mother use his given name or because she'd overheard his last remarks, Alec couldn't tell. "Nothing, Ma. Just some kids." But his mother wasn't having that. "You tell me, what kids?" She turned to Alec. "What is this all about?" Alec wished the floor would open up, but Ginger spared him. "Gary Barker and some of his mates reckon to have a demo." Ginger was going to leave it at that, but his dad turned to Alec. "Look, Alec, suppose you tell us. That was what you came here for, wasn't it?" Alec shrugged. He did owe Mr. Wallace. He told Ginger's parents what he'd heard in the laths at school. Ginger flapped his hand. "Nothing to worry about, Pa. We can handle it." "Oh, yes, and can you handle this?" Mr. Wallace pulled out of his pocket a folded copy of the Bugletown Gazette. He read from the front page as he flattened it out. "Residents on the Crown Hill estate no longer think the phenomenon known locally as the Black Panther is a joke. With an increasing number of sightings of the mysterious black figure, there have been complaints that police have not dealt with the matter. There is talk of forming a vigilante group among the people on the estate. Mr. Raymond Barker—" "Oh, him!" burst out Alec. "That's Gary Barker's dad. They're as bad as one another." "That's right," said Mrs. Wallace. "You know he's been making trouble for you on the gang at work, Joe," she said to her husband. "Anyway, if his son tries making trouble down in Berners Street, we'll give him vigilantes." Ginger made a grab in the air with his left hand and let loose a terrific swipe with his bunched right fist. Mr. Wallace turned and glared at Ginger, who put his fist down and looked foolish. "You know, Byron, it's people up on Crown Hill who have to sort out Raymond Barker." "Why?" "Because if you start something, the others up there will gang up on you, not him. I'm going to have a word with Alec's dad and some others tomorrow." "A word?" Ginger's lip curled as he repeated the word. His mother turned to Alec. "That's right, Alec. We're coming over for the party tomorrow. Expect your sister's getting all worked up about it now." Alec made a face. "Sooner it's over the better. Flippin'—" He stopped as Eulalia came in from the stairs. "Hi, Alec," she grinned. "Thought you'd be here." She winked. "What does that mean, Eulalia?" demanded Mrs. Wallace, looking at both of them. "Nothing, Ma. Listen, can you help me with my dress?" Mrs. Wallace raised her eyebrows. "Again?" She rose, then turned to Alec. "Want another Coke, Alec?" "No thanks, Mrs. Wallace. I have to go," said Alec. "Well, watch out for the Black Panther," said Eulalia, pausing by the door and grinning at him. "That is not funny," said her mother, and pushed her through the doorway. Alec said good night to Mr. Wallace, and Ginger followed him to the front door. "Listen, Skinny, thanks, mate. One of these days, Gary Barker's going to get crucified." "What about Spotty Sam, though? He's more dangerous." Ginger shook his head. "Don't you believe it. Sam's a thicko, but he's not really bad. Barker's pure poison. If he weren't there, Sam would do nothing." "You reckon?" said Alec. He went down the steps. The mat which he'd left at the side of the wall had disappeared. What a life! He set off along Bonus Street as fast as he could. It was nearly 11 o'clock already. There was going to be trouble when he got home. Mum and Kim and all the others were bound to be about. He couldn't sneak in unnoticed. Life had become one long train of disasters. Gary Barker making trouble, Barker's father stirring it up, and Abu's flipping son, instead of helping, was just messing up Alec's private life. These days it wasn't even worth keeping a score. Right at that moment, from somewhere above and behind him, Alec heard the twanging of a banjo and the sound of cheerful singing. "Oh, my Eulalia, you're lovely than Adelia." With a rush, the mat landed in the street by his side. "Where you bound, stranger? Hop on, I'll give you a lift home," said Abdul. "Saida, my son." "Hello, Dad, can you speak up? There's a lot of static on this line." "My son, what are you about? I have tried without cease to speak to you." "About, Dad? Father. I'm about to solve every problem Alec ever had." "What vanity is this, my son? Tomorrow, O Father, when I swing into action, all infidels are going to bite the dust. Barker, Spotty Sam, Blaggett the Fat and Mighty, you name them, I'll fix them." "How so?" "First, spell number 36. "What? The giving of strength to wine and ale?" "That's him, O Father." "Next, spell number 99. "The transport of persons through space, my son?" "That's him, Father." Then, finally, to round it off, spell number 1000. "I do not believe you, my son." "You had better, O Dad." "Next, my son." "I fear great mischief." "You must return at once. The Grand Genie will be most angry." "Tell you what, Dad, O Father, I think I'll settle down here. There's this lovely girl I've been serenading. Would you like to hear my song?" "No, my son, I would not. Furthermore, you may not stay. It is forbidden." "You said 14 years at least the other day, Father." "That was the other day, my son. Further, you may not consort with human maidens." "Father, I can't hear you properly." "Oh, son, but you do. Lastly, you shall not use spell number 1000. "Why not?" "Spell number 1000, the changing of the nature of human being, is forbidden on pain of—" "There's always got to be a first time, O Dad. We can change things, so why not people?" "Do not anger me, O son. Spell number 1000 is most strictly forbidden by the great oath of obedience." "Dad, I have news for you. I haven't taken the oath of obedience." "My son, wait! Dad, don't ring me. I'll ring you."
Chapter 25. Now Blaggett takes off. Saturday began fine and grew warmer as the day went on. By mid-afternoon it was like a summer day, and the house was crowded as people arrived for Kim's party. Neighbours from the estate, Kim's mates from work, including Mrs. Wallace and her family, then the Blaggetts, Archie, the intending bridegroom, looking very smart, and his dad looking very dignified, Alec had to admit, in his undertaker's dark suit with a carnation buttonhole. Eulalia in a green two-piece looked smashing. It all seemed set for a great day. Grandad, carefully instructed by Kim and Mum, was on his best behaviour, sitting near the front room window, nursing a glass of stout as he grinned cheerfully at everyone, including Mr. Blaggett. He didn't even protest when Dad went round filling up everyone's glass and leaving him out. The conversation was slow to start, but soon got going, and the house was full of chatter and laughter. Alec, busy passing plates round, could help himself to chicken and tongue sandwiches, mini meat pies, cream cakes, and chocolate eclairs, and no one seemed to be bothered. Every 20 minutes or so he slipped upstairs to the box room, which was now filled with people's coats and hats and other gear. But each time he checked, the room was empty, and from the can on the cupboard came reassuring snoring noises. Abdul must be sleeping off the effects of last night's magical mystery tour. Alec remembered that Abu had always been worn out after a heavy bout of spell-pushing. As the afternoon wore on, he didn't even bother to check whether Abdul was inactive,
and at last he stayed downstairs and got on with a serious eating of tongue and eclair, washed down with plenty of coke. The first sign of trouble came when Miss Morris turned up late, dressed in her old raincoat, but with a new purple hat with fruit and flowers on the top. All the conversation stopped when she stood in mid-floor and announced, "It's terrible, isn't it?" Everyone turned towards her. "Poor Mrs. Taylor, it's terrible." "What is, Miss Morris?" asked Dad, coming forward and trying to steer her to one side and quieten her down, but she stood firm. "Her little lad, Sam." Alec registered that one. Little Sam? Who was she talking about? "You know, the one who's at school with your Alec." Miss Morris paused for effect. "He's missing. He's vanished from home." There was silence. Then the conversation started again. One of the neighbours said, "I'm not surprised the way his dad knocks him about." "I don't think it's that at all," asserted Miss Morris. "There's this fella who's been sneaking round the area just lately. He was seen round that old tank building last night, this Black Panther or whatever they call him." There was silence again. Kim looked at Mrs. Wallace and started to speak, but Mum spoke first. "Really, Miss Morris, there's no need to make it sound as bad as that. You're upsetting everyone. I expect the lad'll turn up before the end of the day." "I don't know." Miss Morris raised her voice. "We've had nothing but trouble." "Well, I don't want any more of this conversation at my party," interrupted Kim, pink in the face. "If I'm not wanted," said Miss Morris, turning with dignity towards the door. "Give over, Etty, love," said Grandad, suddenly coming forward. "You've only just got here. Wait till you've had a bit to eat and drink, then you can have as many rows as you want." To Alec's amazement, he led the old lady over into the corner and settled down with her. After a minute or two, the conversation started again. Alec noticed Miss Morris was drinking stout, and Grandad had his arm round her. Wonders would never cease. Grandad was always poking fun at Hetty Morris, but the two of them looked like old pals. In fact, Grandad looked more than friendly. His thin face was flushed, and his white hair flopped over his eyes. He was telling Hetty Morris some sort of joke, and she was giggling and nudging him with her elbow. Just then, one of the guests asked if the windows could be opened. Mum looked doubtful, but Dad went and opened a couple. But within 5 minutes, the air inside the front room had begun to fill with a faint but unmistakable aroma. People started to sniff. "Oh, let's have it shut, Connie," said someone. "I know it's hot, but anything's better than that. It's the canal, worse than ever." "Yes," came another voice. Everyone seemed to Alec to be talking much louder, as if they were well away. "They ought to do something about that canal. It's an outrage." Mum looked nervously to where Mr. Blaggett sat bolt upright in an easy chair in the corner. Dad said quickly, "Tell you what, I'll close these windows and open some upstairs, then we'll get an updraft." Kim looked round at Alec. "Can you put some music on again, Alec?" Just as Alec put down his plate to see to it, Grandad stepped into the breach. Without a word, he started to sing "If You Were the Only Girl in the World," and Hetty Morris joined in. Funnily enough, they both sang in harmony. It was good. Everybody started to listen. Alec looked at the old man. Grandad was high. The old man's face was rosy red. Miss Morris's face was light purple. Kim grabbed hold of Dad's arm. She'd noticed it too. "You, Dad, what have you been giving our Grandad? I thought I told you." Dad shook his head. "He's had 2 halves of stout, and that's the truth. I'll give you my word, Kim, love. He's just a bit merry." "He's too merry for my liking," responded Kim. Dad looked at her worried face. "You go and sit with Archie," he said reassuringly. He moved into the centre of the room, and the moment Grandad and Miss Morris stopped singing, he tapped on the side of his beer jug with a spoon. Putting on his Mr. Chairman voice, he launched into a toast. He toasted Kim and Archie. The drinks passed round, and Archie, pushed by Kim, made an embarrassed reply. Then cunning old Dad slipped in another toast to the Blaggett family. Alec marvelled at it. You'd have thought Joe Blaggett was God's gift to Bugletown. This inspired Joe Blaggett to get up and reply. Fortunately, he was a good deal less long-winded than usual. He sat down amid clapping. There were more drinks, then someone shouted to Grandad, Come on, Mr. Bowden, let's have another. Yes, added someone else. One of your George Formby numbers. Some of the women tut-tutted. Kim frowned, but Grandad stepped forward into the middle of the room. Alec noticed that Miss Morris had to help him up. Old Grandad was well away, though how he did it on 2 halves as stout was anybody's guess. He waved his hand royally at the audience, and as the room went quiet, he said very slowly and carefully, I want to offer a very special toast. He paused, and the room was quiet. O Lord above, send down a dove with wings as sharp as thistles, to cut the throats of them rich blokes who rob poor folks of victuals. Dad tried to step forward and silence Grandad, but the old man was in full flight. And while he's down in Bugletown, let him do us all a favour. Our noses spare and clean our air to give it better flavour. God bless us all, whate'er befall, and God bless my granddaughter. May our town grow, and may it flow with clean and sparkling water. And as to those with upturned nose who will not cleanse these orders, O Lord, may they, this coming May, be kicked out by the voters. Amid the stunned silence, Mr. Blaggett rose heavily to his feet. Picking his way across the floor to the door, he paused to say to Dad, but loudly enough for everyone to hear, So that's what I was invited for. And with that, out he went. Chapter 26. Bombs Away. When the storm had died down and the house had emptied, when Mum and Dad's efforts to calm everybody down had failed, when Archie Blaggett had rushed off after his father, and Kim in a fury had stormed into her own room and slammed the door, Alec made his way upstairs to the box room. Because Alec had realized just where the source of the trouble was. He forced the box room door open. As he thought, Abdul was there, lying on the bed. The air was thick with smoke. The genie had got rid of his sharp suit and was relaxed in a beautiful pair of creamy white jeans and T-shirt to match, with the slogan, Genies are magic, worked across it in red letters. In one hand he held a cigar, in the other a glass. He waved genially at Alec. Hey, come in, lad. Take the weight off thy feet. You maniac, yelled Alec, not caring whether anyone heard or not. Maniac? Abdul switched accents. You're coming on heavy, man. What is this trip? Maniac? I have just done you all the good a genie could. Good? You've wrecked my sister's party. Abdul raised himself on one elbow and said pompously, It is written in the book, to do a great good, sometimes a little harm must be endured. What good? The fat one is destroyed. He will never be chosen Caliph of Bugletown. You think so, do you? Well, let me tell you, you've caused such a row the two families will never speak to one another again. My sister's wedding's off. Abdul waved his hand. All to the greater good. She should not marry beneath her. What business is it of yours? She wanted to marry him. Women understand little of these things. So that's what you think. Wait till I tell you Lelia. Abdul's face fell, then he looked cheerful again. She will understand. Men know better. Alec stared. You're out of this world. True, O Alec. You belong in the Middle Ages. Also true, O Alec. Listen, Abdul, be serious. What have you done with Spotty Sam? Now don't argue, you've done it. He's disappeared. They were out looking for him this afternoon. Good, said Abdul. Then that will keep them busy, and they will not be able to disturb the good folk of Bona Street. Where have you put him? Alec's voice rose again. I have not put him anywhere. He has gone away himself. What have you done with him? The genie smiled and drew slowly on his cigar. Changed him a little for the better. His face is a complete failure. I have improved it. It was the only one he had. Then he will prize his new face all the more. What have you done? The genie smiled, took a sip at his glass and lay back. Answer me, commanded Alec. Another smile was the only reply. I order you to answer me. Genies have to obey the honour of the lamp, or the can, whether they like it or not. Abdul slowly shook his head. "As I told my father, I have not taken the oath of obedience. Sorry, O Alec, but you have had it. Believe me, all is for the best. Trust Abdul." Alec took a deep breath. He had a sudden thought. "As you told your father? You've been talking to him, haven't you, Abdul?" Caught off guard, Abdul nodded. Alec knew then. "Your dad's been in touch. He called you up through the can, didn't he?" There was no answer. Alec braced himself. "Well, I'm going to let him know what a pig's ear you've made of this. It'll be 2,000 years on bread and water for you, mate." He turned towards the cupboard, but Abdul uncoiled himself like a panther from the bed, and just as Alec's hand touched the can, it swept into the air. Next moment, Abdul snapped his thumb and finger, and the mat left the floor. The genie leapt on board and set the nose of the craft towards the window. In a desperate leap, Alec joined him. Abdul tried, not too hard, to shove him off, but Alec clung on. Next moment, they were through the window and out into the warm twilight. Soon the canal, grey and reeking, lay beneath them. Abdul wasted no time on approach runs. Like a kamikaze pilot, he sent the mat into a screaming dive over the bridge that carried the main road across the canal. 200 yards on, he yelled, "Bombs away!" The can, hurled with full force, disappeared into the turgid waters of the canal with a plop. "Okay, let's head for home base," Abdul told the fuming, helpless Alec. Once back at Alec's door, Abdul landed the mat. "Off you go," he said pleasantly, and with that he vanished. As Alec stared about him, out of the evening sky the mat dropped down and draped itself round his neck once more. Chapter 27. The Dam Buster. Next day was Sunday, but Alec was up early. Creeping downstairs, he made his own breakfast. People usually stayed in bed on Sunday morning anyway, but today nobody was speaking to anybody, so everywhere was quiet. Alec left the house without a sound and was soon heading down the main road. Under his jeans he had on his swimming trunks, and he carried his diving mask by its strap. He hurried along, hoping no one would see him. What he was going to do was ridiculous enough without anyone watching. Once over the canal bridge, he turned down the small track which led to the canal side. The towpath was clear. In the old days, before the Great Pong, people often used to come here for a stroll or to walk their dogs. Further along on one side was open country leading out to the moors. On the side where Alec was walking, the canal embankment sloped down into rows of gardens, big gardens with posh houses. People reckoned they were lucky here because no one could build at the back. As he walked along, he noticed that the canal was in better nick up here. There was less rubbish and more water, and the smell wasn't so strong. And he remembered what Grandad had said. This part of the canal was cleaned up because Blaggett's cronies had houses down below. Still, for all that, the water was murky and thick. And where had that unspeakable genie dropped the can? He had a rough idea it was a couple of 100 yards along from the bridge, but from 10,000 feet up he could have been mistaken. He vaguely remembered the small clump of willows on the far side. He stopped near a small shack used by maintenance men. It was broken and tumble down, but it would do to hide him while he got changed. Just as he was ready to lower himself, in trunks and diving mask, down the shallow bank into the grey waters, he noticed someone else along the canal. It was an old man fishing. What for, Alec couldn't imagine. Anyway, he'd as much right to fish for a can that was there as the old lad had to fish for fish that weren't, so there. He took a deep breath and jumped in. His foot struck the slimy bottom about a couple of yards from the bank. To his relief, the water came up only to his chest, even in the deepest parts. But he had to walk carefully for fear of slipping. Every step brought up muck and made the water even thicker than it was already. He breathed out and then took another deep breath and ducked down. The water was like soup. He couldn't see a thing. It was like hunting for a black cat at night with your eyes closed. He choked on the filthy stuff and jerked up his head. He could catch any one of 2 million foul diseases. He tried again, though, and again. But he found nothing, and the more he moved about, the more the water muddied. Several times his feet struck hard objects, and he ducked down in hope, but always came up in despair. After half an hour he took a rest. The sun was well up now, and he guessed that when it got on the water, the pond would really grow. Still, he had to try again. Groaning, he slid into the water and was just ducking down for the 7th time when he heard, "Alec, love, what are you doing?" He jerked up, lost his balance, and sat down. Luckily, the water was only 2 feet deep here. On the bank stood Eulalia in her green two-piece and white stockings. On her lead she had a dog. No, not a dog. The dog. The terrier Dachshund. As he clambered up the bank, the daft object came at him and started licking his face. Eulalia said, "Our Ginger reckoned he was yours. We found it round our back door last night and took it in. It was starving." "You can have it, for me," said Alec impulsively. "You serious?" "Course I am." She smiled at him and said nothing for a moment. Then, suddenly remembering, she asked, "What are you doing, though, Alec? I thought you got a touch of the sun." He shook his head. As quickly as he could, he told her all that had happened after the break-up of the party. When she heard what the genie had said, she jerked her head. "Huh, typical. Abdul's a sexist pig." "Is what?" "He's a sexist pig, that's what. Blokes always think they know best. Anyway, what do you reckon to do?" "I'm trying to get the can back. Then, if it works, I'll call up Abu and try to get him to do something about his crazy son." "Where's Abdul now?" asked Eulalia. Alec shrugged. "He could be anywhere. He's remembered every spell in the book up to 2000, and he doesn't give a toss which one he uses. He's probably listening to us right now. Tell you what, Skinny. Hold on, I'll go home, get my shirt and jeans on, and give you a hand." "Thanks, you. But I'll just have another go," said Alec, and with that he plunged in further along the bank. For a few minutes he moved about carefully, then struck his toe on something hard. He hopped up cursing, then bent and peered through the soup. Again he plunged down, and this time his fingers caught smooth metal. "Hey, you! It's like a big iron ring. Give it a pull, then." He tried, but it wouldn't budge. "Hey, there's a chain attached to it," he said. "Maybe it's an Iron Age bath plug. That's what it feels like." He retreated to the bank and came up holding the end of the chain. It was light but strong, with flattish links a couple of inches across. It was long enough for him to reach the top of the bank. Now he braced his feet on the towpath and pulled again. It yielded, then stuck again. He paused for breath. He felt Eulalia come close behind him. "Hey, don't you? You'll get your dress mucky." "Give over. This end of the chain's clean. I'll give you a hand." She dropped the dog's lead and seized hold of the chain. "Right, let's go." They heaved once, twice. They stopped, took a breath, heaved again, and this time it came free, and the two of them sprawled on the bank, while the end of the chain, holding a foot-wide round wooden block, came free of the water. "It was a bath plug," laughed Eulalia. "You're not joking," said Alec, helping her up and brushing grass from her dress. "Look," she said, grabbing his arm and pointing. He looked, or rather, he gawped. The level of the canal was dropping. With a sucking, snorting, slithering, sludging noise, the canal was emptying at incredible speed, just like a bath. The thick, muddy, oozy water was whirling and eddying round. As the minutes passed, they gazed, paralysed, until, with a gigantic slop, the last of the water vanished down a round vent in the canal bed. And there, balanced on the edge of the plug-hole, stained but undamaged, was the can. Chapter 28. Soppy Old Alec. Alec leapt down, plunged through the sticky mud of the canal bed, snatched up the can, and struggled back to the side. Carefully he wiped it on the grass, then laid it on its side. "You going to call up Abu now?" "No, I want to get cleaned up first," said Alec, pulling up lumps of grass and dock leaves and rubbing his mud-stained legs. "Well, you haven't time, mate," said Eulalia. "Somebody's coming. I think he wants a word with us." She was right. Charging along the towpath and shouting furiously at them was the old man. "What do you think he wants?" she asked. "I expect he wants his canal back," said Alec. "But I'm not waiting to find out." He snatched up the can and his jeans and T-shirt. "Hey, where do you reckon the canal has gone to?" "Anybody's guess. Good riddance, I say," replied Eulalia. As they set off at a run along the towpath, the mongrel leaping on its lead beside them, she suddenly burst out laughing. "Ha! The things people do!" They reached the main road and climbed up from the towpath. She looked back. "The old bloke's still coming after us. If you go home, he'll follow you. Let's nip down here." She pointed across the road to the shops. Before the old man could reach the bridge, they were safe down the side turning by Nick's cafe. The place was open, and while Eulalia kept watch, Alec nipped round to the gents at the back and got into his clothes. When he came into the cafe, Eulalia was sitting at a table with 2 cups of tea. Alec sat down and drank his gratefully. At last he leaned back. She grinned at him. "Time to get on the hotline to Baghdad, Skinny." He took the can and inspected it carefully. Yes, this was his can, all right. He'd know it anywhere. He took a deep breath and bent over it. "Salam alaikum, O Abu Salam?" He waited. There was no answer. He tried again. Silence. "Let's try together." Eulalia put her hand across the table. They linked fingers and bent together over the can. "Salam alaikum, O Abu Salam?" But still there was no answer. Alec let his breath go. "Well, that's it. Total close down. Flipping Abdul's vanished and left me to clear up the mess, and his dad doesn't want to know." He shrugged and put the can in his pocket. She nodded. "What a pig that Abdul is." He looked at her surprised. "I thought you liked him." She laughed. "Of course I like him. He's great. He's fun. Lots of blokes are fun, but most of them are pigs. And I'll tell you something. If I were your Kim, I'd stop worrying about Archie Blaggett. If he's got the sense he was born with, he won't let his dad get in the way. Not if he's a real man, he won't." Alec nodded. He thought he could follow that. "Hey, you, if blokes are pigs, why'd you like them?" She finished her tea. "Like and like. What choice does a girl have? The world's full of pigs, and the number of ace blokes is small." "Why are you asking?" "Oh, nothing. Come on, we have to go." They rose and strolled out of the cafe. Eulalia caught Alec's sleeve. "Hey, where's that dog gone?" "I don't know," answered Alec. The lead hung over the back of the chair, but the dog had vanished. "Ah, well," shrugged Eulalia. "Easy come, easy go. Pity, though." "I'll buy you one for your birthday," said Alec impulsively. On the pavement outside the cafe, she turned to him. "You would too, wouldn't you, Skinny? You're for real." She bent a little, she had to, and she kissed him. She didn't kiss him on the cheek. She didn't kiss him on the lips. She put her lips to the side of his head and kissed him there, so that his eardrums went squitch. He blushed right down to his belly button. As they stood there together, there was the sound of running feet at the opening to the side turning. A group of lads from their class appeared, Ronnie Carter among them. "Hey, Ronnie!" shouted Alec. "What's going on?" "There's a big bundle on the estate," yelled Ronnie. He ran on, shouting over his shoulder, "They've caught the Black Panther!" Alec stared at Eulalia. "That sounds like real trouble," he said. She grabbed his arm. "What are we waiting for, then?" They set off at a run. "Make room, my son. This can was not built for 2. "That's the trouble with your generation, Dad. No ambition. My generation, son, is what your generation is and will be. Genies for all eternity." "What are you doing here, O father?" "I was summoned by my friend and master, Alec Bowden. I fear there is great trouble, and that it is your meddling which has caused it." "Mine, O father?" "Thine, O son. I know not what the Grand Genie will say. That depends on how the matter ends." "Well, can I wait and see what happens, O father?" "That you must do." "Is there anything I can do?" "Not, my son. What is to be done, Alec must do." Chapter 29. Black Panther at Bay. On the estate, up the slope from the main road, was a roundabout with a grass mound surrounded by a brick wall. Backed up against the wall, circled by a pack of some 20 or 30 grinning lads, was a strange figure. He was all in black wind cheater, dark jeans, black wool gloves on his hands. Over his head and face was a black nylon stocking, knotted at the top. It flattened his nose and hair and stretched his cheeks so that he looked like a crazy hijacker. The circle round him was wide, because whenever any lad tried to come near, he swung at them with an iron bar. As Alec and Eulalia ran up, one lad had come too near and was doubled up on the ground where the black figure had caught him one in the stomach. "Come on, rush him!" shouted some. But nobody moved. Eulalia, with Alec close behind her, pushed into the crowd. "Let him go, you stupid lot!" she shouted. "Somebody'll get hurt." "Get lost, Wallace, and you, Bowden, or you'll get hurt." Gary Barker was there, keeping his distance, but stirring it up. "This bloke knows where Sam Taylor is, and we're not letting him go till we find out." At that moment, seeing his tormentor's attention taken off him for a moment, the black figure turned, scrambled up the wall, across the grass mound, and away. "Get him!" yelled Barker. Eulalia and Alec were up on the mound and across it before the others, who were so packed together they had to push and shove before they had room to move. Eulalia ran in great loping strides, and she was soon abreast of the black figure. "Don't run that way," she shouted. "That's a dead end." But he took no notice. He ran, staggering every now and then as if puffed out, right down the road which led past the allotments and ended in the high tarred wood fence surrounding the tank. By the fence he turned again as Eulalia and Alec ran up. The pack were 20 yards behind and getting into the swing of the hunt with whoops and yells. "We'll have to get him over the wall," said Alec. He looked round. Nearby was a plank and a pile of builder's rubble left from some repair work. "Hey, you, let's get that." While the black figure stood still, backed up against the fence, his breath coming and going hoarsely, Alec and Eulalia wrestled the plank up against the fence. "Come on," she shouted, and caught at the black runner's sleeve. For a second he seemed about to shake her off, then hastily, and in increasing panic, he scrambled up the sloping plank and leapt to grasp the top of the fence with his hands. Behind him, Alec snatched up a handful of stones from the rubble heap and slung them in a scatter over the oncoming crowd. They stopped a second or two and looked round for missiles, but the road up there was bare. Alec gave them a second shower. "Go on, you!" She was already clambering up the plank. With a final salvo, Alec followed her. Just as he reached the top of the fence, a stone struck him just behind the ear. He barely felt it, but knew the blood was trickling down. But now he was over the top and leaping down to land with a bone-jarring thump on the other side. He looked about him swiftly. The tank was just as he remembered it, the land overgrown with alder bushes and weeds, littered with piles of brick from fallen walls and chimneys. At the centre stood the ruined factory building, its broken roof gaping. Near at hand the canal ran by, though now it was nothing more than a muddy channel piled with rubbish. Crossing the canal some 15 feet up was a gantry that had once been used for a travelling crane. Now only the rusting steel girders were left. "Quick, over the gantry!" shouted Alec, as the heads of the first pursuers appeared above the fence. "Come on!" he yelled, leading the way. But the runner in black pushed past him and reached the gantry first. Climbing like a monkey, he was up and over before Alec and Eulalia were on the lower girders. By the time they'd got across the canal, he had vanished at the corner of the main factory building. "This way, you!" called Alec. "We'll go in the old crane room. If the door's still okay, we can hold 'em off in there." They turned the corner and scrambled up the broken steps to the crane room door, the black runner in front all the time. As they reached the head of the steps, he was through the open doorway. The door crashed to behind him, and as Alec and Eulalia reached it, there came the sound of dragging and scraping from inside. "You? He shut us out." Alec banged on the door. "Hey, mate, let us in. They'll murder us for helping you." But the door was jammed fast. Inside, Alec could hear the rasping breath of the fugitive, but not a word came from him. He had remained dumb since they first came to his rescue. "He's mad," said Eulalia. "He's scared stupid," replied Alec. "Look out!" she cried, as a half-brick thudded against the door. Below them, the first of the crowd, Gary Barker in the lead, had reached the foot of the stairs. The rest were strung out across the tank lot, and one or two were still struggling over the fence. But there were enough down there to fix the two of them already. "Just a minute, Barker," he shouted down the steps. "You might as well leave it. He's barricaded himself in here, and he's going to top anybody that comes near him, so why not clear off and leave him alone?" "Get off!" jeered Barker. "He's forced to come out sometime." He looked round at the crowd that was growing behind him. "Anyway, we've got you two for now." He picked up another brick. Alec looked down at the lads behind Barker. They were a mixed bunch of third years. There were some blokes he'd always been friendly with, and some whose families were friends with his mum and dad. He couldn't believe they'd gang up and crucify Eulalia and him on purpose. But they were all heated up. They might do something stupid. Correction, they were going to do something stupid. "Listen," he shouted, talking to the crowd, not Barker now. "Listen, Ronnie, Kevin, Andy. How do you know this bloke's the Black Panther? You haven't seen him, have you? He's wearing a mask, isn't he? There's something bent about that bloke in there," shouted one lad. "He was trying to break into Taylor's. We saw him climbing up to the window." "Ah, give up," shouted Barker, and swung his arm. Alec threw up his own arm, and the rock skimmed his elbow to shatter on the wall. That hurt. Eulalia pushed past him and scrambled down the stairs. "You little sod, Barker!" she yelled. Barker backed off into the crowd while Eulalia confronted them. "Come on, who's first?" she demanded. "You throw another rock and you're going to need a new set. And I don't mean teeth." They hung back. Alec jumped down the stairs 3 at a time and pushed in front of Eulalia. "This is all you're doing, isn't it, Barker?" he said. "You've been trying to stir something up ever since you came in our class. Well, you can lay off." Barker pushed forward again. "You're going to make me, Bowden." Alec bit his lip. "No, you try and get past me, Barker." Someone spoke up at the back of the crowd. "Go on, Gary. You said you were going to duff up Bowden, didn't you? Let's see some action. We can have the big fight later." The crowd waited. This was a bit more like it. Alec put up his fists. His stomach had gone cold. The muscles around his knees started to quiver. He knew all the familiar signs. He was scared stiff. He couldn't get away. Even if there was room to run, he couldn't leave Eulalia on her own, to say nothing of Blackstocking up there in the crane room. Barker came forward. Alec squared up. He got one on the side of his head and landed one on Barker's chest, took another in his teeth that loosened one, swung at Barker, and missed. Now the noise in the crowd grew again, but it was a different noise, more normal, the usual schoolyard noise when two boys have a go at each other. Barker came in again. Alec shrank to one side, shot out his fist and got the point of Barker's nose. For a second, tears sprang in the sharp, light-coloured eyes. Eulalia had drawn back up the stairs, and Alec moved over to the place where she'd been standing to try and get the wall behind him. But he moved too slowly. Barker closed and kneed him. All the pain in the world seemed to centre in Alec's groin. He folded. Barker's knee struck him in the throat, and he fell back over the bottom steps, then rolled forward on his knees. Barker had drawn off to avoid tripping. Now he poised about 2 yards away. Alec raised his head, his eyes half-blinded with tears of pain. It was in slow motion. He could see Barker coming forward to put the boot in. In that second, Alec's hand touched the can in his jeans pocket. "Masalama, goodbye, Abu," he murmured. At that instant, through his half-closed eyes, he looked up beyond Barker's hurtling body, over the heads of the crowd, up the slope to the top of the railway embankment, where the arches met the piles on which the railway station was built. From this little summit a narrow path wound down from the road into the tank. Then Alec had a vision. At the head of the slope he saw a huge brown man coming down the path with majestic strides, followed by a crowd of others, all dressed alike, with bright orange sashes round their waists. Suddenly he knew what it was. Abu. Old Abu had come to bail him out, and he brought all the genies in Baghdad to help him. Chapter 30. Who's a Battered Little Chap? With a great yell, Alec gathered his strength and hurled himself forward in a low dive. Barker's rising foot missed his hair by a fraction, and Alec's shoulder struck Barker in middle with paralysing force. Down he went, backwards, scattering the nearest lads in the crowd, and rolled on the ground with Alec on top. Alec gave him no second chance. Raising himself up over Barker's chest, he began to thump the face beneath him. "You little bastard, Barker, I'm going to—" How long this went on he couldn't say. He was blind with rage. But he felt himself pulled away from Barker and pushed to one side. He stared. The crowd had moved away from the foot of the stairs, and in their place stood a group of 6 men. He recognized Sam Taylor's father, then a lean dark man with a small moustache. He looked as though he could be Barker's dad. Behind them was Mr. Wallace. Suddenly Alec understood. They were the track-laying gang with their orange plastic waistcoats tied around their hips. They were his genies. It was all in his imagination. But now what? "What's all this?" Barker's dad was speaking. "What do you think you're at, beating our kid up?" "Your kid?" Alec was surprised at how calm he felt. He reached up and wiped the blood off where it was trickling down his face. "Your kid has been asking for it. He's been trying to get another lad lynched, that's what he's been doing." "What other lad?" "We don't know," answered Alec, "but he's hiding in the crane shed, scared stiff." Sam's dad turned to Barker. "What's all this about, Gary?" Gary wiped his smudged face. His voice was still shaky. "We caught a nignog trying to break into your house." He pointed at Alec. "He tried to stop us. He slung rocks at us, then he jumped me." "We'll see about that," said Mr. Barker, taking a step forward. "We'll have him out of there." But Eulalia blocked the way. "Come on," ordered Mr. Barker. But she didn't move. From the back, Mr. Wallace spoke slowly. "Don't be hasty, Mr. Barker. You look after your son. That happens to be my daughter." Gary's dad hesitated, then stepped down. "Look," went on Mr. Wallace, "if that lad in there's scared, you won't get him out by force." Mr. Barker bit his lip. "If that mugger we've been looking for is in there, then we're going to have him out." He called to Sam Taylor's dad. "Pass us out that sledge, Bert. We'll have the door in." "He's got an iron bar," warned Alec. "He'll do anybody that gets past the door." Now Mr. Wallace came to the steps. "Let me go up there and talk to him. Maybe I can get him to come out without anybody getting hurt." Deliberately he eased past Mr. Barker and climbed the stairs. "Listen, son," he called. "I'm Mr. Wallace. The railway gang's here. You can come out. We won't let anybody down here touch you, okay? But come out and let's see who you are." They waited. Slowly the door grated open. The black-clad figure appeared at the top of the stairs. With Mr. Wallace ahead of him, he came slowly down, and the crowd made a space at the foot of the steps. Firmly but gently, Mr. Wallace took the iron bar from the black runner's fingers. Then he reached out for the mask, but the boy jerked back. "Ah, come on," snapped Gary Barker's dad. He took hold of the knot holding the nylon stocking and gave a huge jerk. There was a cry of pain, as if he'd wrenched off some hair with the mask. As the covering came loose, there was a gasp from the crowd. Beneath the nylon stocking was a face, dirty, streaked, but quite familiar. It was Spotty Sam. Chapter 31. That's the one who did it. Mr. Taylor spoke. "Sam, what do you think you're at? Where have you been? Your mum's been worried sick." Sam raised his hands and tore off his gloves. Then he looked down at his hands as if he didn't recognize them. He shook his head slowly, completely baffled. "It were me face, me hands. Dan, they looked different. But now it's gone." He stopped, as if he couldn't say any more. "There's nowt up with your face, lad, you gormless." But Sam wasn't listening to his dad. His mind was working slowly, but it was coming up with some answers. With a snarl, he launched himself at his mate. Gary Barker saw him coming and tried to hide in the crowd, but Sam went in like a bulldozer, and in seconds Barker was getting his second battering in 10 minutes. Mr. Wallace caught hold of Sam's collar and drew him gently but powerfully backwards. Then his dad caught hold of him. Sam made another rush, but he was held back again. Gary Barker painfully picked himself up. His lip was bleeding. "We thought it was a darkie, Sam. We didn't know it was you." "You thought?" yelled Sam. "You thought nothing. You were having a big giggle, weren't you? You bent, you little—" Sam's father turned on Mr. Barker. "If all this is true, mate, then you're in lumber. I'll have you off this gang if it's the last thing I do." Mr. Wallace put himself between them. "Gentlemen, let's be calm. We've been lucky so far. No damage, or not much. But it could have been very bad. Luckily, some people kept their cool, or it could have been hospital, police court. What else? Who knows? Perhaps coroner's court." He spoke to the crowd. "You lads, go off home, all of you, and don't let's have any more of this. You," he beckoned to Gary Barker. "Come here, my lad." Gary came slowly through the crowd. His father watched and said nothing. "We know what's gone on today. We know who started it. Nothing's going to happen unless you cause trouble again. But if there is trouble in future, you know whose door it'll come knocking at." He turned. "Eulalia, now you go home with Alec and make sure he gets that cut bandaged." Mr. Taylor spoke up. "I'll take our Sam home. You going on to the low level?" he asked the others. "Yes. We don't finish till 2 o'clock," answered Eulalia's dad. He nodded to the others, and they began to make their way across the tank towards the sidings beyond. As the crowd split up, Eulalia and Alec slowly climbed the path to the station and out onto the main road. Now and then they grinned at each other. They had too much on their minds for talking. When they got to Alec's house, the kitchen door was open. People were sitting round the kitchen table. Dad was there, Mum too, and Grandad. And what looked like one of Grandad's mates. It was only when Alec was on the doorstep and the old man stood up that they recognised each other. "Aye," said the old man, "that's him. That's the young devil that emptied the canal." Chapter 32. Can we have our canal back? "That's all I need," thought Alec. Grandad spoke up. "All right, George, don't get your braces in a twist. Sit down. The lad's been in the wars. Connie, you better clean him up." Mum took Alec's sleeve. "Come on to the sink, love. I think it looks worse than it is. What have you been doing?" "It's a long story, Mum." Dad beckoned Eulalia in. "Come in and sit down, love. I'll put the kettle on. If it's a long story, we'll all need a cup of tea." Alec told the story. At least, he told part of the story. He couldn't tell them he was dredging the canal for an empty beer can so that he could phone Baghdad long distance, could he? So he pretended he'd lost his money box in the water. That was true, though there wasn't much cash in it. That had all gone on kebab and such. "Well, you daft apeoth," said Grandad. "What were you doing down there with your money box anyway?" "I was planning," said Alec. "Well," said the old angler, "you've gone and done it now. What did you want to pull that chain for?" "I didn't know there was a hole at the end of it. How did I know all the water would go?" "Anyway," said Grandad, "what use was it? Don't tell me you ever caught anything but a wet bum there, George." "No, I'll not catch anything there now except yellow fever," replied George. "It's nothing but a muck heap. The thing that baffles me is where did it all go to?" "I can tell you that," said a voice from the doorway. All at the table looked up. In the doorway, smartly dressed, stood Archie Blaggett. He hesitated. "Can I come in?" "But of course you can, Archie," said Dad. "Here, make room for him. I'll get another cup." "No, it's all right. I'll stand. I've just come from home. Dad's in a state." "We know, and we're very sorry about it," said Mum, looking meaningfully at Grandad, who looked out of the window. "Oh, I'm not talking about yesterday's carry-on. I mean today's," said Archie. "We've had people at the house all morning." "Whatever for?" "Well, ever since the canal came down." "Came down?" they all asked at once. "Yes. All of a sudden, the water in the canal came through a vent in the embankment into a culvert that hasn't been used for donkey's years. It came out in a rush, right through the back gardens, all over the lawns, right in through their kitchens, and out through the front door again. They've been playing war with our Dad, claiming compensation and all." "What's he going to do?" asked Alec, fearing the worst. "What can he do, especially after yesterday?" said Archie. "He got the borough engineer on the phone, then the county people, then British Waterways. For all I know, he's been on to Downing Street. Anyway, top and bottom is, tomorrow they start the clean-up, and they won't stop till it's finished right the way along. Of course, it'll be easier without water." He paused. "Thing is, they can't work out how it happened." He looked round, and now it was Alec's turn to look through the window. Old George looked at Grandad and cleared his throat. "Happen they disturbed something when they first started cleaning up a week back," he said. Then he winked at Alec. "Anyway," said Archie, "I thought you'd like to know." He looked at Mum. There was something else." Mum laughed. "She's up in her room, lad. Go on up." Everyone laughed and relaxed. Alec's mother said, "Another cup of tea, love?" "No thanks, Mrs. Bowden," answered Eulalia. Suddenly she remembered something. "Hey, is that the time? 1:30? "Well, that clock's about 10 minutes fast." Eulalia got to her feet quickly. "I have to go. I'm late for dinner. I'll get skinned." As she headed for the door with a quick goodbye to everyone, Alec gave his mum a quick glance and got to his feet. "I'll just—" he said, turning his head away as Dad grinned at him. "Well, don't be long, lad," said Mum. "We'll be having dinner in half an hour. Those of us that have any appetite, that is." She looked slyly at Grandad. Alec shot out of the house and caught up with Eulalia. They strolled up the road together. It was empty in the warm afternoon air. The slope past the allotments down to the big fence round the tank was empty too. It was incredible. No sign of that big battle except a few stones scattered here and there. It had all happened in a flash, and now it was all over. All the proof he had that it had happened was the sting of the cuts and bruises on his face. Eulalia smiled at him. "Improves you no end. Makes you look like Clint Eastwood," she mocked. "Give over, you," he said, but he couldn't help grinning. "Anyway, you put a stop to Barker's gallop." Alec looked at Eulalia and then around. There was no one within miles to hear what they were saying. "I wouldn't have had the nerve if you hadn't been there." She looked at him embarrassed, then cleared it with a laugh. "Give over? You're a little devil when you're roused, Skinny." Now he was embarrassed. She stuck her arm through his and they walked up the main road onto the old canal bridge. Beneath them and stretching in either direction, the canal was lined with mud, rubbish, and small pools of water. "Looks as though we sorted the canal out as well." As they leant on the bridge, Alec felt the hard edge of the can in his pocket. He took it out and looked at it, then at Eulalia again. "You know, for one moment, I actually believed old Abu was coming back to put it all right for us, after his maniac son had messed it up." "Oh, don't be too hard on Abdul," she said. "He was good fun, even if he was a bit of a pig at times. Though his magic was a bit of a dead loss, wasn't it?" "Yes," answered Alec. "Even that little dog's vanished." "Right," said Eulalia wistfully. "Pity about that, eh?" Alec held up the can. "Do you really believe there's magic in this?" She took the can and turned it in her hands. "Dunno, Skinny. But tell you what, stick it back in your pocket just in case. Now come on, I'm late for dinner." "No, my son, we must return." "If you say so, O father. What will the Grand Genie do?" "I think he will be merciful. For all came out well in the end, thanks to Alec and Eulalia. But my spell helped a little, O father." "That might be said, my son. Are you ready now?" "Yes, O father." "You will not sorrow for the beautiful maiden?" "No, O father. Did you hear what she called me?" "What, my son?" "She called me a pig." "Why do you laugh, O father?" "The ways of humans are beyond understanding, my son." "True, O father." "Why do humans not make magic?" "Because they are not genies and do not take the oath of obedience, my son." "If that is so, O father, why do genies need humans? What use are they?" "Human beings, my son, have to carry the can." "Before we go, there is one thing, O father." "What, my son?" "I must return a small dog to its owner." "And who is that, my son?" "That, father, they must sort out between them."
That was Genie on the Loose by Robert Leeson, read by Kenneth Shanley. We do hope you've enjoyed listening to this Chivers audiobook. For details of other Chivers recordings, please contact us, and we will be delighted to send you a catalogue listing all our titles, as well as information about our most recent releases. Our telephone number and address can be found on the box cover or catalogue.